judge friend is very jealous because he doesn't even have a gavel. He's like, "You get a gavel?" Yeah. An actual judge. All right. Good. Let's see. It's afternoon. Good afternoon. We're going to call this meeting of the TRPA Regional Plan Implementation Committee to order. The date is Wednesday, November 15th, 2023. It is 12:08 approximately. The first item on the agenda is roll call to determine quorum. Margaret?
Miss Aldine?
Here.
Miss Dis?
Here.
Miss Gustafson?
Here.
Miss Loomer?
Here.
Mr. Honigman?
Here.
Mr. Settlemeyer? Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Great. Thank you, Maria. All right. Now I'll go over the remote and in-person meeting rules for the day. For members of the community who are joining us remotely, remote committee members, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand in Zoom. You'll find the icon on the bottom of your screen. My thing just dropped off a couple paragraphs here. Let's see. Okay, for members of the public who are joining us remotely, to observe the meeting, go to trpa.gov and under the calendar heading, click on Governing Board Hybrid Meeting for November 15th, 2023. There you'll find a link to the public webinar hosted on Zoom. To address committee members directly with your comments, raise your hand in Zoom by clicking the raise hand at the bottom of your screen at the appropriate agenda item. With your hand raised, you'll be unmuted by TRPA staff and have 3 minutes to address the committee. If you've used the dial-in number to join us by telephone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand and be unmuted. For items that are agendized as informational only, we will hear public comments during the general public comment period at the end of the meeting. Comments on items agendized for action or possible action, we will hear public comment before the board takes any action. To remote committee members, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand in Zoom and you'll find the hand icon at the bottom of your screen. Remote committee members please may not use the chat box to make any comments or to have sidebar conversations. Please, everyone, remember to mute your mic unless speaking to cut down on background noise. Finally, I'd also like to ask that all remote committee members turn on their cameras if they're able. Members of the public who have joined us in person, please raise your hand at the appropriate time for public comment, and you'll be called to the front to speak. To ensure that everyone has time to make their desired comment, you can agree with previous commenter rather than making comments that repeat what others have said. Committee members who are in person, please raise your hand if you wish to make a comment to speak. Speak clearly into the microphone in front of you. If you're viewing the webinar on a personal computer, please ensure that your microphone and speakers are turned off to prevent audio feedback into the room. If committee members need to ask clarifying questions during the presentations, please do so, but we'll save our deliberation until after the presentation is complete. All right, so our next item is approval of the agenda.
Mr. Chair, there are no changes to the agenda other than we as staff would like to welcome our new member, Alex Limmer, and I'm sure you do too.
Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself or behind, I guess. Yeah, welcome. You picked an auspicious meeting to attend as your first, so welcome.
Appreciate that. Really happy to be participating.
Great. We're glad to have you. All right, then we will deem the agenda to be approved as posted. Our next item, agenda item number 2, is approval of the minutes. We have a set of minutes from September 27th, 2023 on page 51. Do any members of the committee wish to make any changes?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Awesome.
We should just agendize it, you know, if Shelley has commented. A few clerical corrections, which I have shared with Maria. So given that, Mr. Chair, I move to approve the minutes from the November 15th, 2000, what am I saying? I wish to approve the minutes from the September 27th, 2023 meeting of the RPIC with a few clerical changes, which I have shared with Maria.
Great, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Nope. All right, motion passes. All right, that brings us to agenda item number 3, Discussion of possible recommendation on the Phase 2 housing amendments, including proposed changes to Code of Ordinances, Chapter 1, Introduction, Chapter 13, Area Plans, Chapter 36, Design Standards, Chapter 37, Height, Chapter 31, Density, Chapter 30, Land Coverage, Chapter 34, Parking Policies, Chapter 52, Bonus Unit Incentive Program, and Chapter 90, Definitions and changes to the goals and policies, land use and housing sections that would only apply to projects applying for deed restricted bonus units. Information on this agenda item can be found on page 125 of your packet. As a reminder to the public, after committee discussion on the item, you may raise your hand in person to be called on or in Zoom to be unmuted by TRPA staff to share your comments. We have received lots and lots and lots of written comments, and I can assure you have read them. So if you have given us your written comments already, we hope you can let others speak first, please, at least. All right, so now I'll pass it to John Hester to introduce our TRPA team, who will give the presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John Hester, Deputy Director, Chief Operating Officer for the record. And on our team today will be Alyssa Bettinger, Senior Planner, who has been the lead on these Phase 2 amendments, and Karen Fink, who's in charge of our long-range housing and community revitalization work. And I'd like to give a little intro, and I'll probably make it a little broader than I originally thought, just because we have a new member. But as you know, we've been working on this since 2020, so almost 4 years. That's when the Tahoe Living Working Group was created, which has some of your board members as well as APC members, and the APC Advisory Planning Commission actually chairs that and another working group that you all have created. We are now in Phase 2. Alyssa in her presentation will go through what we have already approved in Phase 1. As soon as we get through this Phase 2 work, we've got a big Phase 3 coming up, which you'll hear about as well. And you kind of alluded to this, that this applies only to 946 units and only in certain areas. So what we can do to address housing at TRPA is limited. But what we heard from you 16 months ago when we had the retreat with you is, whatever you can do, really go big, go for it. Let's try to make a difference. This is a real issue. So we, at your direction, I think did something a little different in that we hired a group you'll hear about who looked at this from the perspective of the market, somebody who was in the market. What could they do? We have a good analysis, which, you know, frankly, it isn't always what's most popular, but it's what we think works. And that's what you told us you wanted us to do. That's not to say that what came out of that and what's been proposed hasn't evolved, because it has. And you'll hear during our presentation a lot of refinement that's happened. But what I probably think is most important for my introductory comments is something I haven't said before, but I heard it the last time this item was in a public meeting, was at the APC Advisory Planning Commission. We had, and that was just a week ago, we had a young woman, I guess she's young, I don't know, speaking, the kind of person who doesn't have time to come to these meetings. We don't see that much. The kind of people we hope to reach in Phase 3, who said, I and my husband both work in the public sector. We have a 400 square foot house in the North Shore Tahoe City area. We want to have a family, but we're not sure we can find a place we can afford that's big enough on what we make, and we really would like to stay here and raise our family here, but we don't think we can. And I talked to some of the APC members after that. That really hit some of us pretty hard. That's really what this is about. This is about trying to keep our communities working, keeping our communities places where everybody can live, because there's different roles, different income levels. So what you'll hear about, what we've designed is proposed to meet your direction even though it may be viewed by some as significant change, we think it's necessary to really address the housing issue as you guys directed us to. So with that, as my opening comments, I'll turn it over to Alyssa.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, members of the committee. I'm Alyssa Bettinger. I'm a senior planner with TRPA, and I am here to present the Phase 2 housing amendments with a request for a motion to recommend approval of the amendments and the findings to the governing board. Next slide, please. The amendments that you will see today focus on addressing the affordability crisis that we are facing in the Tahoe Basin. Over the past few decades, the cost per unit of housing in the basin has skyrocketed. We need more housing units at an affordable price, and the proposed amendments that you'll see today help us get there. Next slide, please. But this isn't just about housing. The environmental gain and affordable housing are very much linked, and that link is through compact development. Building compact development where people can actually walk or bike to the places that they need to go helps us reduce VMT. Development that is compact in our town centers is more likely to use less coverage on a per unit basis. And also by building it in our town centers where already a lot of our coverage exists, and there are opportunities to tie into area-wide stormwater treatments, helps us meet our water quality goals. And then last, building compact development along our main corridors provides the density that our transit really needs in order for it to work. So while this proposal was developed with housing in mind, it does benefit a lot of our other focus areas and regional plan goals. Next slide. So as John mentioned, we've been working on the Tahoe Living priority or strategic priority for the past few years. We started with Phase 1, where we worked on allowing accessory dwelling units on smaller lots, as well as incentivizing conversions between old motels to long-term residential housing. We are now in Phase 2, which is what we're presenting on today. This phase is really focused on making it more financially feasible to build out our remaining bonus unit pool, and I'll get into that in the next few slides. Beginning in the new year, and we've actually already kind of started the pre-Phase 3 process, we're going to be looking at some of our larger policies to make them more equitable, and as John mentioned, really trying to engage some of the community that we don't hear from very often. So we'll be looking at some of our longstanding systems like our growth management and development rights system, our fees, and our permitting systems. Next slide, please. Just a quick snapshot of the Phase 2 amendment process. So kind of breaking this into what we've done so far. We have had 8 publicly noticed meetings starting about 2 years ago with the Tahoe Living Working Group, where they gave us input that we really needed to look at these development standards. That should be one of our priorities, which is why we focused on it in Phase 2. John mentioned that we came to the governing board last summer in 2022 and did a workshop where we really honed in on some of these development standards. And at that point, the governing board recommended that staff go back and identify the development standards that really needed to make this type of housing pencil. So we have done that. We've also gotten a lot of input at these other various meetings throughout the process. Next slide, please. So before I get into the proposal, I just want to provide a little bit of context. TRPA sets growth caps for the basin. So the most recent growth caps were set in 1987 and 2012, and the proposal does not change these caps. So we're not authorizing any new development with this proposal. This proposal does, however, focus on just the 946 bonus units that remain in our pool. And I think most of you are aware, but when we talk about residential bonus units, they are residential units that TRPA and the local jurisdictions hold that we can distribute to residential projects that are deed restricted. Next slide, please. And we have 3 deed restriction levels. So the first affordable, or the first 2 levels, affordable and moderate, are income-based, and these are in line with the state and federal requirements. So you can see on the slide here, these are just examples for a 1-person household in both Placer County and Douglas County. Each county has their own income limits, but the household income has to be within what is shown on this slide. And then in 2018, we adopted a new deed restriction level called the achievable level. And this is really focused on our local workforce. So it doesn't have an income cap, but it does have the requirement that at least one person in the household works at least 30 hours per week within the Tahoe Basin. And it also must be their primary residence. So we have 3 levels of deed restrictions here. Next slide, please. And so in addition to the bonus units being distributed to deed restricted residential units only, they also can only be distributed within what we call the bonus unit boundary. And it's shown on these slides in green. And the bonus unit boundary includes a half mile from transit, a half mile from town centers, and all areas that are already zoned for multifamily. And so we really do want to see the bonus units, or we require that the bonus units are distributed within this boundary. But as you can see, this boundary is relatively large. So we have broken the proposal into 2 different areas. One is within town centers, and one is within our areas that are already zoned for multifamily. And I have maps of both of these locations in the next few slides. But we are really trying to target these 946 bonus units into town centers and multifamily areas just to get that compact development. Next slide, please. And in order to do that, and in order to provide those incentives, we are making changes to our development standards. And I think most of you are aware by now, but when we talk about development standards, we are talking about coverage, height, and density, as well as parking and setbacks. Parking and setbacks are they are set at the local jurisdiction level. And you can see in this graphic here, development standards really influence what gets built on the ground. You can see that the red space in the home is lost square footage due to parking on the ground floor, and then roof pitch requirements on the top floor, which just leads to wasted space that can't actually be used. So looking at our development standards, we can look at incentivizing this development in town centers and multifamily areas. Next slide, please. So again, we have been working with a third-party consultant over the past couple of years to look at what changes we should make to our development standards, and asking questions like, if we update our density standards, for example, how does that reduce the cost to build multifamily units and the resulting affordability level? And we have found that making changes to our development standards in some cases can reduce rents up to 40%. Next slide, please. So again, the proposal is broken out into 2 locations. These are our town centers. Our town centers were primarily drawn around our existing commercial development when they were established. But what's missing here is residential, in order to support those commercial establishments, shops, restaurants, as well as our transit. Next slide, please. And these are the town center locations for the South Shore. And I do want to mention here that because these 946 bonus units are already authorized to be built, and they will likely be built at some point, really targeting these areas for our higher density housing is in line with the California Attorney General guidelines on development in wildfire prone areas. And so again, because this is already likely going to happen, it is better from a wildfire perspective to be built in these town centers than dispersed more broadly through the bonus unit boundary. Next slide. So within town centers, we are proposing to allow an additional 9 feet of height. We currently allow 56 feet in town centers. We would be going up to 65 feet. We would be allowing coverage over 70% when there is, or when the project is tying into an area-wide stormwater treatment. And I will explain a little more in a little more detail about that on the next slide. Density is limited by other factors, primarily coverage, height, and setbacks. And so in this case, we are exempting deed restricted units from density requirements, because right now our density standards actually encourage and sort of force larger units. And so by exempting these projects from density standards, we are encouraging smaller units that will be more affordable. And then the last change is to parking. Local jurisdictions currently require between 1 to 2 spaces per unit. And at our PIC direction in September, you asked us to allow projects to go lower with a parking analysis. So the code that is before you today, or the proposed code amendments that are before you today, would allow projects to deviate from current local standards if they are showing a parking analysis and showing how that demand is being met, either through parking or with other strategies like uncoupling parking from the unit or shared parking agreements, etc. Next slide. And I want to point out here, so for the coverage proposal, allowing additional coverage over 70%, we allow 70% right now in town centers. We would be allowing additional coverage only if the project can, the runoff from the project can be treated by an area-wide stormwater system. You can see on the maps here, the areas in blue, these are the areas where we have active area-wide stormwater treatments. So as of right now, these are the only areas where projects could actually take advantage of this. The areas in green are in various planning or various stages of the planning process. So our hope is that these areas are further developed over time. But at the moment, only the areas in blue would potentially be able to or have the capacity to treat the additional runoff from these projects. Next slide. So the next area that we have proposed changes to are areas that are already zoned for multifamily. And these are areas where a lot of our de facto affordable housing already exists, but it was built oftentimes before TRPA and local jurisdictions had regulations around development standards. And so if they were to come in today, oftentimes these projects, our existing multifamily wouldn't actually be able to get built. These areas are also, generally within walking distance to town centers. They're close to transit and services. So again, a prime area where we do want to incentivize compact development. Next slide. And these are the same areas. They are the areas in the lighter orange, and the darker orange are our town centers. Next slide. So within our areas that are already zoned for multifamily, we are proposing to allow more flexibility with roof pitch. So right now we allow up to 36 feet on a flat lot in these areas, but we do require a pretty steep roof pitch. So we are not allowing any increased height, but we are allowing for a shallower roof pitch. And this allows more livable space. You don't end up with a large attic. And it also contributes to energy efficiency. So we think that this is a win here. Additional land coverage up to 70%. In these areas, we allow up to 50% coverage right now. So this would be a little bit higher, and this again would require either contribution to an area-wide stormwater treatment, or projects could do on-site BMPs as they would today, but the local jurisdiction would have to monitor and ensure that the BMPs are maintained over time in order for them to get above or get up to 70% coverage in this case. Similar to the last or to the town center proposal, we are proposing to exempt deed restricted units from density requirements. Again, in this case, really to encourage smaller size units that are more affordable. And then last, the parking proposal is similar to town centers, and this was also at our PIC direction in September, allowing the project to deviate from what the locals currently allow down to 0.75 parking spaces per unit on average. But again, they would need to do that parking analysis and show the demand and how that demand is being met. Next slide. Within the multifamily areas, we are proposing an additional height allowance in order to create a transition between the height that is proposed in town centers going to the height that is allowed in multifamily areas. And so we are proposing an additional 11 feet of height on parcels that are contiguous and adjacent to town centers and also within a 500-foot boundary. And so the parcels in pink shown on this map would potentially be eligible for that additional height. We do have an interactive map on our website at trpa.gov/housing if anyone wants to do a deep dive on these parcels. Next slide, please. And this is an example of 47. This is a 47-foot high building. So this is an example of what what a structure could look like in a transition zone. This is not a proposed project. This is just a example rendering. Next slide, please. And again, the transition zones on the North Shore, we just wanted to highlight this map as well. Next slide. We've received some feedback that folks would like to see these incentives applied to mixed use projects because again, in our town centers, we would love to make them walkable with some commercial on the ground floor and residential above. So the proposal would apply to mixed use projects that are building 100% deed restricted housing above. As in the requirement here is that the commercial portion is no more than 50% of the total square footage in order to ensure that those incentives are still being applied to deed restricted housing. And then this proposal would also apply to ADUs, primarily the coverage. So depending on the location of where the ADU is being built, they can get either up to 1,200 square feet of coverage for a deed restricted ADU or 70% depending on whether they're in a town center or not. Next slide. We have been doing quite a bit of outreach, primarily in the last 6 months. Again, we've had 8 publicly noticed hearings. We've done quite a few pop-up booths, so at farmers markets, at social services events, and at other community events throughout the summer. We got a lot of great input from the webinar that we held, as well as the survey back in September. And we've also heard a lot of great ideas from the many one-on-one meetings that we've had with the community and just really trying to get the word out about these changes. Next slide, please. These are the one-on-one meetings that we have had in the last 6 months or so. And again, we've gotten a lot of great input and the proposal has evolved based on some of these conversations. And I just wanted to highlight a few areas where the proposal has changed. We were originally including a proposal to increase height in multifamily areas. That has since been removed due to quite a bit of community concern. Originally, we were proposing density increases for market rate. We have reeled that back to just apply to deed restricted in this proposal. We were not planning to address parking requirements in the original proposal, and we have heard a lot of input about needing to reduce the amount, or at least provide an option for developers to build less parking. So that is now included in the proposal as well. Next slide. And then I did want to just highlight a couple of the changes that we've made since you last heard this at RPIC in September. There were a few members that were concerned, RPIC members that were concerned that taller buildings would lead to shade on adjacent roads and properties. So we have included in the proposed code that projects would need to provide a shade analysis during the project review process and show that they are minimizing the amount of shade to adjacent roads and structures. And then the second change is to the coverage incentives and how they apply to parking. So we have received some input that anytime a project is getting these coverage incentives, that additional coverage should not be going to parking. And so the proposed code language says that if you are receiving, potentially above 70% in town centers, in this case, you cannot have parking above what is currently required by the local jurisdictions. So for example, I know this is a little confusing. For example, if the local jurisdictions require 2 spaces per unit and the project is receiving coverage incentives in this proposal, they could not build more than 2 spaces per unit. Next slide, please. Right now, local jurisdictions set height, density, and parking standards in their area plans in most locations. There are a few exceptions. Staff's recommendation is that some of these changes that are not included in area plans, such as coverage, would take effect within 60 days following the code change. Where standards are inconsistent, locals would update their area plans per Chapter 13 of the TRPA code. And locals would have the option to opt out of these standards, but they would need to show that any reductions to height, density, or parking would be supplemented by some other sort of direct subsidies or other programs that would result in a net increase, or that would not result in a net increase in the cost to build these deed restricted units. Next slide. We are getting close to finalizing this phase 2. We are in the process of finalizing our amendment package before bringing it back to the governing board on December 13th for consideration. Next slide. We did bring this to APC last Wednesday on November 8th, and we did receive recommendation from the APC. They did recommend that we release a frequently asked questions list with the governing board packet. And I do want to note that we already have quite a few answers to our frequently asked questions on our website, again at trpa.gov/housing. So if people do have questions, I would encourage folks to look there, but we will be releasing an FAQ with the governing board packet. Next slide. And with that, I will hand it back to Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Alyssa. And thank you, Karen, and all the staff who have been working on this for a long time and done such great work getting it out and trying to juggle the millions of voices that have been giving us input on this. All right. So we are in trying to get to the public comment period. I wanted to ask our committee members if they have clarifying questions before public comment to kind of keep it to that, and then we'll have our main discussion after public comments, if that's okay. So does any committee member have a clarifying question or anything? Cindy.
I do. I think there's a bit of a point between the local jurisdictions in the opt-out program and which standard would apply. And I think I understand TRPA's position, but John, if I could ask you, if we didn't choose to opt out, from Placer County's perspective, we still have to issue a permit, go through design review, and make sure it's compatible and addresses local community issues. I need to understand what TRPA's position is on that.
I'll start and then John and the team can add if they feel appropriate. So let's kind of step back a little bit and talk about two different processes. One is the area planning process, and then the other one is local jurisdiction permitting. So it's always been in the case in TRPA or in the basin where you usually need two permits to proceed with any significant project. That's one from TRPA and one from local government. So there's, in general, in the past, there have been two separate kind of documents that control what you can do. TRPA's rules basically preempt any inconsistent local government rules. And we'll come back to that in just a second. With the area planning concept that we put in 2012, we kind of, for a lot of local governments, merged those two kinds of sets of applicable regulations. So if they went ahead and did an area plan, they usually made that area plan also their state law general plan and implementing regulations, whether you're in California or Nevada. So the area plan, as we referred to it, really became two operative documents, one for TRPA, one for local government when they're issuing their local plans. And so that required two sets of approvals, right? It required both the local government, either the city council or the board of supervisors or the county commissioners, would have to approve that document, not only to bring it forward to TRPA, but also because it served as the local government's own implementation regs. So it contained things like, for example, we don't necessarily set like setback and prior to this parking standards, for example, whereas TRPA's regs tended to focus more on the kind of essential development requirements like coverage, height, density. And in some cases there is overlap. So the question that we're addressing now is what happens in these areas of overlap when the regional plan changes, but the underlying local government hasn't taken action yet. Okay. When we put in the when we made the 2012 amendments to create the area planning process, we to some degree anticipated this when we looked at there's going to be changes in the future. There'll be changes to the regional plan that affect area plans. And what do you do about those? So essentially that was kind of an opt-in program where we kind of gave the local jurisdictions a year to bring their area plans up to snuff. And if they didn't do it, TRPA would take over that job of essentially creating those standards within the area plan. What we're proposing here is an opt-out mode where the language that we're adopting in the regional plan is specifically to preempt any inconsistent local jurisdiction regulations. And the local jurisdictions can opt out of those specific regulations if they show, and as staff kind of went through, the local programs, or at least as effective as getting to the ultimate objective, which is getting affordable deed restricted units on the ground. So that's kind of the setup that we have now. So the issue that you're raising is, now go back and remember that we have the area plans are really two sets of two documents, right? The local jurisdiction rules and also TRPA rules. They're not set out differently. They're one document basically. So for coverage, it's kind of an easy discussion because in general, local plans don't have coverage standards. Those are set by TRPA. And so those rules will go into effect. And when a TRPA permit is issued, that's what controls. Some local jurisdictions, I think most local jurisdictions, however, have their own height rules, or they are the same as TRPA's height rules. So what happens when TRPA changes those height rules in the regional plan? Two things have to follow on. One, the area plan needs to be is either expressly superseded, as we're doing here, and the local government has got to make some change so that it's at a minimum consistent with those new implementing regs. Height is a little bit of a strange issue, is same with, to some degree, density. Essentially saying is we want to increase height here in these very limited circumstances in order to realize the environmental benefits and social benefits that housing, in-basin housing bring. And those, that change then to some degree separates what's happening on the regional level, TRPA level, and what's happening on the local jurisdictional level. That the local jurisdiction hasn't changed what they consider to be their rules to come in conformance with the regional plan rules. Our position is, notwithstanding that divergence, because TRPA rules preempt that that's what would apply, but local jurisdictions, in my conversation with some of our local county councils and city attorneys, they may take a little different view of that. But they think, no, we have to change our rules, our state mandated rules first, or they can issue not the TRPA permit, but they can issue their local jurisdiction permit, which arises under state law, not under our federal compact. Is that, I know there's a lot of kind of overlaps there, but that's kind of where we are. So what, what we know that is not productive for development of these kind of low margin housing units is to have an area where there's not clarity. So in the next implementing year, we're going to work with local jurisdictions to try to come up with a mutual understanding of what the applicable rules are. And if there's not that opt-out within a year, then we'll be taking a firm position that the regional plan clearly says that you had a year to bring your plan into conformance with either the development standards or the opt-out provisions saying that you need to come up with something, if it's less height, that is equally as effective as the greater height, for example. So that's kind of where we are.
Well, I think we'll hear from the public, but the letters we've gotten have been a lot of that contextual issue of where this height might go, how prevalent it might be, will it change the nature of our communities? And so there's a lot of dialogue along that, and I wanted the public to know we have heard that. We very consciously in Placer County adopted some area plan amendments recently that will be coming to this board where we took out height for commercial developments. This is a different matter with housing. I still think there's some areas where we can reach common ground with potentially some sites, but we may not. And so then we would have the choice to do the opt-out as long as we then, and it might be that then county government has to bake up that feasibility through a subsidy. And that is an opportunity. So I just wanted to be clear on that because this is a interesting area.
Shelley?
By the way, your staff, your non-legal staff have been having dialogue with us about it as well.
I know I asked them to do that because I wasn't clear and I was hearing so much anxiety from our communities and stress about what this could mean. I know it's a limited number. I know most likely not much of this will go to North Shore when you look at 946 units and if you distribute that basin wide. I understand all that, but the community nonetheless is very, very concerned about it. So I just wanted to make sure I understood the legal process that we could address their concerns moving forward.
That was a nice segue into my question. And this is more of a procedural question, I guess, John. The requirement that you bring your area plan into conformance with the regional plan within 1 year, right? That is codified. I mean, that's in our current policies,
Yes,
right?
chapter
Okay.
13, 6.7, I think.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
You
All right.
want
All
the
right.
exact site.
Okay, I'm gonna write that down.
A or B.
But the
B.
question that I have is, we know, we've heard from at least one developer who is anxious to proceed. So what if a local jurisdiction comes to you and say, look, we want to opt out, but it's going to take us time to prepare our area plan amendment. In the meantime, the developer has acquired a piece of property in that jurisdiction and is going to take advantage of these new rules and regs that we are poised to adopt. So how do you, is there a possibility that if in fact they come to you in some degree, with some degree of formality about wanting to amend their area plan with some specifics about how they're going to use alternative strategies to get to the same place, is there an opportunity to stay the implementation of these regulations in that area, to allow them time to produce an area plan that comes up with a variety of options like inclusionary housing or, getting donated land to facilitate the development of affordable housing? There are a whole host of options on page 131 of our packet. But I think that's kind of a concern. In other words, will it even be worth our while to opt out if developers are going to make an immediate move after 60 days of adoption to move forward with their plans to develop these higher buildings with more density and more coverage?
Well, I think that's a combination of legal and kind of more housing policy stuff, which I'll defer to John. Theoretically, yes, there is a way to do that, which I would essentially say is what the regional plan considers is essentially you have a year. And you can essentially keep your area plan in place for that year, but you must upgrade within the year. What the opt-out provision that we are adopting here is a little more aggressive than that. That essentially we're taking the position, and the board would be taking the position that our height rules apply. And so local governments, your state law height rule is preempted. You can choose if you want to back off that as a board, if that's your policy choice, and say, no, we want to have it go under kind of the more standard process where you get a year to bring your plan into compliance, or and that the compliance would be that you have to come up with a program to either adopt those same rules, bring it into conformance, or go through a process whereby your mix of factors generate the same social benefits and environmental benefits.
So we'd have to go from a 60-day implementation to a 1-year implementation.
Basically, yes.
Okay, well, I know a lot of hard work has gone into this, but I think that based on my conversations with Cindy about what occurred at APC, I mean, that's what a lot of the members of the public are asking for, is more time to kind of digest these changes and maybe give their local jurisdictions an opportunity to come up with a plan that is more in keeping with their vision of what, multiple options might look like in terms of providing affordable housing.
Thanks.
John, I think John.
Oh, yeah, John.
Or did you?
No,
I'm done.
We've been in active conversations with each local government, and probably, I don't know that any two want to do it the same way. So it's not going to be a one size fits all.
Right. No, I understand that, John. The question is, if you're one of the jurisdictions who wants to use a different approach, and you've got somebody who's acquired a piece of land in your jurisdiction, and within 60 days, they can submit their plans to TRPA for approval, that kind of negates your ability to look at other more creative solutions that may be more in keeping with what the people of that jurisdiction want in terms of maintaining character.
Well, I'm not sure I would say that's how it would happen.
Okay.
If I came, I'm Marshall County, John Marshall County,
Okay. Wow.
and I come to you and I
That's a
say,
promotion, John.
spelled differently, just so I'm not picking it. And I have a height standard that says 56 feet, and TRPA has just adopted 65.
Mhm.
I, as Marshall County, can decide whether I'm going to stick with my 56. I can just say, you know what? I'm not going to stick with my 56. I'm going to go ahead and use
Sure.
TRPAs if I want to do that within 60 days. So it's onus is really on them, or frankly, I think they could come in and say, we're going to buy the land and put in the stormwater system. And this, going back to how we got to where we got, with this pro forma and this analysis by Cascadia, they might be able to get the housing even cheaper without going to.
Well, that's what I'm saying, but I mean,
50.
if a developer, in other words, that 60-day period and these amendments go into effect,
I think it's 1 year.
no, it's 60 days. the
Our,
amendments
our,
go into effect.
only the part that's not considered.
Only the coverage. So they couldn't propose it. They couldn't propose a tall building. They could only propose more coverage, and we need to talk about,
This, only the parts of.
yeah, that
if
they don't.
Yeah, if our code is the only code on a topic, it goes into effect in 60 days. If it's in conflict, that's when they have a year to deal with it.
Okay, all right. I think that's an important distinction to make.
Very important. That's what
Because
I was
most
trying to-
people, think that once it's adopted in 60 days, it's gonna be a free-for-all. We're gonna have people, coming in, where max out their density, max out their coverage, max out their height, and start building high-rise apartment buildings.
And I believe at least one jurisdiction I'm thinking of says we defer to TRPA's height, so they don't have to do anything.
Okay, well, that's fine for them, but I just want to give local
Yeah.
jurisdictions
Yeah.
more
I-
latitude.
John I saw him reaching for his button, so he may correct me, or he may say there's no such thing as Marshall County.
Well, I think this needs to be clarified, but it also needs to be part of code amendment, I mean, because people are confused, as I was, about the difference between the 60-day enactment and 100 days to bring an area plan into compliance.
I think we should move on, because I think
Okay.
now we're kind of getting more into the discussion
Sure.
side of things as opposed to just answering the technical
Okay.
question. But I think there's a little more to be said on that.
The reason I was asking, and I think we wanted to have that discussion before public comment, was that then public comment can be addressing those issues more correctly. So thank you.
Great. Okay. Any other clarifying questions before we go to public comment? All right, let's move on to public comment then. We'll now go to public comment on this item. If any member of the public wishes to address the committee on this agenda item, please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button on the bottom of your Zoom screen, or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you'll be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. So, okay, you could, come up first, and maybe if you can join him in line, kind of, we'll try to make it go fast, since I think there's a lot of people online. The little.
Push it? All right.
Yeah, thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vinton Hawkins, and the hat I'm wearing today is Boatworks Mall and In at Boatworks and our commercial condo in Tahoe City. We have 34 unit motel. We have 35 plus local businesses and tenants in the mall, and some tenants in our commercial condo. And I want to firstly say what a great job planning you've all done. We're very much in support of the amendments. The number one thing that we hear for our tenants after 5 years of operating this location is retaining employees and operating their businesses. And almost every single tenant that we've had fail in there is a direct result because they cannot get and hire stable employees. So this is so critically important to us. We call it, like, we're not baking a cupcake here. It's a 15-layer cake. These proposals are the first few layers. We have many more layers to go before we ever see anything come out of the ground. It's a rigorous process. The sooner you can push it through, the more you can support it, the sooner we'll be able to fix our problems, at least in Tahoe City, by having some workforce housing there. Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you, Vinton.
Got to move this down. Hi, I'm Randy Fleischer. I'm an Incline Village resident and developer there locally. I'm doing 947 condominiums, and I own about a acre site that I'm deed restricting for hopefully 40 to 60 workforce housing units. So I'm here to speak in favor and want to compliment the staff on the amendments to the development code, which will allow us to go up one floor and add 10 to 15 units. It's a very important issue. We hear from all the local employers that they're not able to retain employees and keep people there. So we're hopeful that along with your cooperation, that we'll be able to develop this site and deliver those units to the community. And Alexis, I hope that you don't opt out and that you stay the course and allow us to continue with the development and design of our project. So thank you very much for your time and appreciate all the good work here.
Thank you, Randy.
Good afternoon, Mr. Members of the Regional Plan Implementation Committee, Lou Feldman, and I'm joining the chorus of support, but I wanted to kind of give you perhaps a broader overview. And my memory is, and the County of Marshall might correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in 1987, we created 1,400 bonus units. And 35 years later, we've deployed 450 of them. So maybe about 11 a year over the last 35 years. And that's not a track record to take pride in. So the remaining 950 or so are not going to fly off the shelf. These projects are going to remain challenging financially and otherwise. But the sooner we can create more incentive, the sooner we can address what is a crisis. Doesn't do justice to the lack of housing for our workforce and the impacts to our employers and to our economy. So staff has done, I think, a courageous and far-reaching step. It is a step, but I could not encourage you more wholeheartedly to adopt the staff recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lou. Anyone else in the audience? Okay.
Hi, I'm Patrick Taylor with Alpine Corporation. I'm not going to take a lot of your time because I really going to echo everybody else's comments that has already spoken here. And staff has done a fantastic job and spent a lot of time working on these amendments. And they're really what us developers need to provide the workforce housing that we're trying to provide in this community all around the lake.
Thank you, Patrick. Anyone else in the room? All right, seeing no one else, then we'll open it up to online public comment. So again, if you are online, you can raise your hand by clicking on the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen or by dialing *9 on your phone. Catherine, do we have anyone?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So far, we have 3 hands raised. The first hand up was Chris King. Chris, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking comments. I am a full-time resident of Incline Village. Been here for a few years now. Just want to focus on one thing in the plan and certainly support the need for workforce housing and anything we can do to increase the availability of workforce housing. And the one point I want to focus on is the definition of achievable, because that is not going to support the kind of workforce we're talking about. It does support me. I work here, and otherwise I wouldn't qualify for the income requirements. But someone like me who's working remote, and I know there are a lot of people like me, especially since COVID. So that the result of that is that you then end up building luxury condos and selling them to people like me. And we think we're helping with the workforce when we're actually not helping with the workforce that we're targeting. So I know it's well down the path of developing the plan. And there's been discussion of this before, but it is really a serious loophole within the plan that is not going to help achieve the goal, and in fact will hurt, because again it allows for those luxury condos like we're seeing being built in Incline right now with the new project coming up. So I would respectfully encourage you to try to think about that one point and eliminate achievable, or otherwise define it so it has some real teeth within it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Next up.
Next hand raise is Toby Tyler. Toby, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Yeah, so please see my full comments submitted last night, incorporated here by reference. The Sierra Club Tahoe Group objects to TRPA's Phase 2 housing amendments to their code of ordinances and requests RPC members to vote it down. The Sierra Club fully supports true affordable housing in the Tahoe Basin, which these amendments will not accomplish. But the Sierra Club would wholeheartedly support more projects like this Sugar Pine Village, not this developer-guided plan to provide for the missing middle or achievable housing, a category that the California Housing Code doesn't even recognize and has nothing to do with providing affordable or workforce housing for this tourist economy. The proposal is designed to only encourage or incentivize rather than mandate affordable housing and has no assurances or enforcement mechanisms. These amendments are a Trojan horse named economic sustainability in housing that is designed to incentivize developers and those eager to further exploit Tahoe's scenic beauty for profit. Allowing heights up to 65 feet is reckless and unnecessary. TRPA was formed in part because of the high-rise casinos at State Line. What TRPA needs to develop is some backbone and political will and do the following to create more affordable housing. 1, remove the achievable category or mandate that all the deed-restricted housing is truly affordable. 2, require new developments, hotels, retail, etc., and large existing resort employers to provide workforce housing on site. 3, severely cap STRs throughout the Tahoe Basin, and increase fines and enforcement measures to ensure compliance. 4, fund programs such as lease to locals. 5, provide incentives toward repurposing abandoned buildings and converting existing structures from empty commercial spaces to housing instead of focusing only on new building units. In addition, NPDES stormwater requirements would be violated by these code amendment changes by not requiring stormwater collection and treatment on site. TRPA needs to slow down the approval of these massive changes to their code. The proposal hasn't evaluated capacity of existing stormwater facilities and ensure that all stormwater is collected and treated. Leaving the stormwater requirements and snow removal on walkways up to the developer and local jurisdiction is abdicating TRPA's responsibility. The Sierra Club also opposes the use of the initial environmental checklist for these proposed changes, as they do not come close to adequately evaluating the environmental impacts. Public safety will be severely impacted during an evacuation caused by climate change-induced wildfire risks in the basin, since traffic is already at gridlock levels around the lake much of the year. Cumulative impacts must be addressed in a new or supplemental EIS/EIR to the 2012 regional plan with a 27% population increase and all the planned development in the works. If a full EIS is required for Phase 3, then a full EIS is required now. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby.
The next hand raise is Bill Chan. Bill, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Bill Chan, representing Tahoe Prosperity Center. Thanks to the TRPA team for all the work that's gone into considering considering this amendment and any potential unintended consequences and the long-term ramifications. I, like many of the other commenters, support moving quickly on these amended changes. I just would hate to see this process get bogged down looking for a perfect solution when one doesn't exist. And I'm happy to see movement here. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
The next hand raise is Ann Nichols. Ann, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Yeah, good. I guess it's good morning. Yeah, you really did go big with this plan, and it's still just really not ready. One of these bonus units, obviously you can change and add to this. Maybe in Phase 3, you'll add to the pool, and how the pool is being allotted isn't by jurisdiction. It goes first come, first serve, I guess, chosen by John Hester and Karen Fink. 52% of the units so far have been allotted to Placer County. and only a couple to Washoe County. I don't see anything to Douglas. It's just, that isn't equitable. Bonus units are also created through conversions. So it isn't just this amount, and it can always change. And this is, you're expanding height, density, and coverage outside town centers into neighborhoods. This was not part of the plan, or the goals and policies never mentioned achievable housing. It was always affordable. That's what the California laws say. And, moderate. So this is just a super, these meetings, you've had all these meetings. The living working group is just all of you. It's all APC, governing board, county. It's really not the public, and we weren't really included in all that. So this is not ready, and there is no clarity. There's things you could do. Remove the two-step process, manage STRs, on-site development, just as Toby was saying, get rid of achievable. If you look at the number of units, of bonus units that have been given out so far, they're all for achievable. The Chalet Blanc, the Placer County's given $1.5 million to, that's going to be achievable. They won't say what they're going to charge for rent or sale. So this is not, it's not hitting where you need to hit. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby. Anne, I'm sorry, I was scrambling. Thank you, Anne. All right, Catherine.
Next hand raised is the Keep Tahoe Blue Zoom account. If you unmute, you can address the commission.
Hello, good afternoon this time. Gavin Feiger on behalf of the League to Save Lake Tahoe. Just first off, thanks for the time from staff and RPIC and APC and all the board members that have been, and the Tahoe Living Working Group that's been working at this for a couple of years. Especially over the last year, there have been a lot of changes to the original amendments that were proposed, and Alyssa and Karen went over those, I think, really well in the presentation today. So we do feel like these are starting to target just affordable housing and just those bonus units, the current remaining bonus units, which we can support. And we are supportive of affordable housing and providing some incentives and concessions for that, because it is a dire need, and we're in a serious situation with that. That said, we, as we've said since the beginning, and since 2012, really support concentrating the remaining development allowed in Tahoe into town centers. We really don't want to see incentives given outside of town centers at this point. We know, like, affordable housing, dense housing is better in town centers, where we can concentrate and address impacts, and where it's more walkable. You don't need as much parking. So we'd really like to see it just start with the town centers, see how we're doing. And then in phase 3, look at some tweaks and maybe expanding it outside of town centers. Along with some other commenters, we really don't want to see the adjacent parcels, the parcels adjacent to town centers, get incentives. Those town center boundaries are really thoughtfully drawn up, and to change them could be a good thing, but needs a much more detailed environmental review and just overall process to see what the opportunities are. So that would also be better in phase 3. One of the main reasons that we don't want to see incentives outside town centers right now is especially through the IEC, the environmental checklist, and the reference to BMPs, best management practices, being an acceptable way to get additional coverage outside of town centers. We know the residential BMPs are not audited or monitored. We don't know how well they're implemented, if they're still effective, and it's unlikely a local jurisdiction has the staffing, the resources, the money, the programs in place to be able to do that. So it's one of our main reasons for also not wanting to see any of these incentives go outside of town centers. And then just real quick on parking and coverage, this is something we've been hammering on for a couple of years now, and we're really happy with the changes that have been made since our pick last month and APC last week. The language about less strict analysis needed, still an analysis needed, but a little less strict to get those lower parking minimums. And then no additional coverage going to parking. That's been our big thing. We're willing to give up some parking, some coverage, but not for parking. The last thing is making sure that this is very clear that this IEC only looks at these bonus units. And after at APC last week, staff said that they were looking at that, and we provided some specific recommendations in our comment letter. Thank you. Sorry, I went a little over time.
Thank you, Gavin.
And we have 5 more hands raised at this time. The next hand up is Jean Diaz. Jean, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Good afternoon. This is Gene Diaz, Executive Director for St. Joseph Community Land Trust. And we did submit written comments that provide more detail, but just briefly, we very much support the proposed amendments that reflect a move towards form-based land use regulations, which allows for more effective use of land and will help achieve the affordable housing goals. The one suggestion we do have is to look at section 52.3.1 dealing with the allocation of bonus units. Right now, moderate income is lumped together with achievable. And we think it's really important that, because, as I indicated in the written material, the 3 categories have very different economic criteria, that each criteria have its own allocation of bonus units. So we really recommend that we look at creating a separate pool for low or affordable, moderate, and achievable, and not have them compete with each other, given the very different dynamics in each of those components. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jane.
The next hand raised is Christina Hill. Christina, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Hi, thank you for taking my comments. And I just am amazed at how little environmental review went into this, these proposed changes. You know, when you look at the TRPA code, it says that you have to make written findings. And all I see being made is references to other documents like the 2012 regional plan update and old outdated documents that say, oh, so there's no impact in environmental checklist. And it's just, that's not making a finding. If I was to do that for a residential application, I would get a letter back from TRPA saying my application was incomplete. And so I can't understand how these huge changes that are being proposed are getting such getting away with doing just an environmental checklist. That's just unbelievable. So I think you need to, I know you're going to make findings in phase 3, but by then it will be too late. I don't know why you're not making the findings, that you're proposing these changes that will create this massive amount of development and not making the environmental findings which are required to maintain the thresholds. As a former TRPA employee and a 43-year full-time Tahoe resident and a land use planning consultant, I feel that's inadequate. So please, you know, delay or require that these findings be made prior to your approval. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina.
Next hand raised is just first name Niobe. Niobe, if you could unmute and give your full name for the committee.
Yes, hi, this is Niobe Burden Austere, and I live on the North Shore. Thank you, first of all, to everyone who's been working on this. We do want affordable, achievable, not so much, but affordable and moderate housing. And I just want to support those people that are seeing the loopholes and making comment about this. We've had 8 public public opportunities, and there's still public outcry about specifically the height more than anything and whether it's necessary. I've written about 5 different public comments. I will read one of them, one of my last ones, regarding private development of workforce housing. I just learned about the Hopkins Village, which is obviously, I know, been aware by one of the governing board members, as it's in Eastern Placer County, and it's a real mess with a private developer despite being granted all the land with infrastructure already in place. That's some good incentive. Buyers are earning 180% of AMI and can barely afford $15,000 units. One of the owners says that her housing payment eats up 75% of her monthly spending. Is this affordable? No, affordable is supposed to cost no more than a third of a person's monthly expense. So you have to agree that anything the private developer builds, despite the concessions of these amendments, will not be cost effective enough with a profit to be developed to the developer for sale or for rent. Especially the only numbers I've seen have been $2,450 for a single 1-bedroom studio, and no sales price determined. And those units, those size units are not good for any families. So how can we go forward with this without doing more work on the numbers that make sense and stipulating what those numbers should be? There's nothing about this. We can't go back once we build 5-story buildings. And I know it's limited, but it's still there, anything above the tree line. These TRPA supersedes any local jurisdiction. And then you leave it up to the county to prove otherwise that they can make it work with subsidies. Well, that whole process in the meantime is going to be a loophole for people that are sitting on the developers on the sidelines. Please consider doing the due diligence of what the numbers should be in order to address our affordable and moderate and income housing needs. They are of dire need, more than any achievable is ever going to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Naomi.
Next hand raise is Doug Flaherty. Doug, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. Doug Flaherty, TahoeCleanAir.org. Along with the written comments that you've received from TahoeCleanAir.org, I want to mention that TahoeCleanAir.org vigorously supports and endorses all comments made on this issue by the Sierra Club, of which I want to note as an individual, I'm a lifetime member, Mountain Area Preservation, North Tahoe Preservation Alliance, and Friends of the West Shore. I just want to also mention that and reiterate that TRPA has not discussed alternatives to its proposal. You've given us a small cup of take it or leave it descriptions of what you're proposing, but you failed to discuss reasonable alternatives, which there are many. And I guess that's all I have to say. You've got our several pages of information. I'm really saddened that that you're so aggressive on your social issues, which in this case are based on flawed data, flawed substantial information, and you totally ignore the environmental and safety aspects of what you're about to do. And you ram it down the community's throat with a sham environmental checklist, a desktop checklist. Didn't even propose an EA, the next step up. So what kind of environmental guardians are you? It just makes no sense whatsoever. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Doug.
Next hand raised is Sophia Heydrich. Sophia, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Good afternoon, committee members and TRPA staff. My name is Sophia Heydrich, and I am the Advocacy Director for Mountain Area Preservation. We submitted another comment letter yesterday, so I hope you've had a chance to read it. I want to spend my time today posing some questions that I still don't think have been answered, and then also reiterating some great comments that were brought up by the advisory planning commissioners last week. There have been some back and forth emails with staff and community members about the remaining bonus units. There are 946 bonus units remaining, but staff says that about half of those will likely go to projects that are already in the permitting process, like Dollar Creek and 39 North and Boulder Bay. So this broad proposal that would essentially expand town center boundaries is intended to incentivize the development of about 470 units. Am I getting that right? During the community planning process, some bonus units were allocated to the various jurisdictions, but how were they allocated? How can we ensure that the remaining units are equitably distributed among the various jurisdictions in a transparent process? The bonus units conversation has been very confusing. And if there are only 470 units left, wouldn't it make more sense to conduct a site analysis and identify specific parcels across the basin where the additional height, density, and coverage really make the most sense? I think that folks could get on board with some of these incentives if a more thoughtful approach were taken, if we could actually see the sites and understand the context. There may be some places where this will work without adversely impacting the community or the environment, but more height, density, and coverage, especially outside of town centers, that's sprawl. Another approach to consider is to implement these amendments in town centers only for now. If they work as intended, then think about expanding the program to other areas. At the APC meeting, staff stated that subsidies will still be needed to make projects pencil out even with these amendments. So I'm not convinced that this proposal will even result in the construction of workforce or affordable housing. If you're going to run this experiment, do it where people are supportive of bigger developments in town centers, not in transition zones and not in multifamily zones. Another good question brought up by a planning commissioner: what can we do to reduce barriers and incentivize smaller projects, 4, 6, 10 units? The flash vote survey results indicate that more folks are supportive of smaller multifamily projects than large ones. So let's respond to housing needs in a way that is supported by the community. I also wanted to comment on the discussion earlier today about the applicability in local jurisdictions. I think what I heard is that if there is no local standard in place, then TRPA standards will apply in 60 days. But if there is a standard, then local jurisdictions have 1 year to bring their area plan into compliance. Please clarify that. Regardless, my comment is simply that local jurisdictions need to have time to come up with a different plan if their constituents don't support these amendments. It feels like we're racing to respond to what's proposed rather than having the time to be proactive and come up with other ideas. You've got to come up with better ways to give the community a seat at this table earlier in the process. Finally, I wanted to briefly note that the new shade analysis requirement just illustrates that we really need an updated environmental analysis. We don't know what the impacts of building shading might be or whether this mitigation measure is appropriate because this hasn't been considered in an updated environmental review. There's a lot to comment on here, but the fact is that these amendments aren't ready for prime time. Please vote no as proposed and consider an alternative approach, one that is supported by the community and better for the workforce and Tahoe. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia.
There are 5 hands raised still. The next hand up is Pamela Sigdinos. Pamela, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to, first of all, really reinforce what Sophia as well as Toby said earlier. I think what is really important to consider today is if there is this much confusion, both at the board level, based on your earlier discussion, and among the public, this proposal and the amendments are far from ready for implementation. As Sophia said, I do not understand what is the rush to move forward here. There are a lot of moving parts. I think what is absolutely clear is that you have the public's attention. We have attended multiple meetings, webinars. We have provided extensive written comment. And I'd like to add that I found it rather disappointing that all of the public comments from the APC and the public comments that were submitted over the last several days to your governing board and to the RPIC are not on your website today. So for those folks who are looking to try to see what are the issues, you're doing a really good job of obfuscating. I really think it's important that this is a very transparent discussion. At the highest level, this is a perfect example of fire-ready aim. You are trying to answer some very difficult questions, and at the same time, it seems like the solutions you're presenting are not the correct answers. We all want a place for people to live. What you seem to be prioritizing is lodging for visitors, not lodging for the workforce. I know there are many people who feel strongly TRPA can do something immediately by doing more about taking a look at the basin-wide short-term rental issue. I also want to point out, we are not being NIMBY-like here. We all care about the lake. We care about the environment. We care about public safety. These are issues that should be tantamount to any discussion and any move to make big changes to land use. If you were to put this issue on a referendum across the Tahoe Basin, I feel fairly confident as it stands today, this particular amendment and proposal would fail. That should tell you something. Your flash survey vote had lots of comments. That should give you an indication of the fact that this is not ready for implementation. I ask you to please pause, take a step back, and do some more work. We absolutely need to make sure that public safety and the environment are tantamount. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela.
The next hand raised is Leah Kaufman. Leah, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Thank you. I don't know where to start. There are so many topics, unanswered questions, and 3-minute speeches are so ineffective for these complex issues. I understand that there are moving parts and it's been changing, and that's fine. But as a 40-year planner, it's been difficult for me to follow through. I want to say that I support what Mountain Area Preservation, what the League, what Friends of the West Shore, North Tahoe Preservation Alliance have echoed, and Christina Hill. Christina Hill and I started planning at TRPA at exactly the same time. I have written a 12-page letter. I'm hoping that all of you have had an opportunity to read it. It's based on reading code, environmental documents, staff summaries, public comments, talking to my community, and listening to board presentations. I still have a lot of unanswered questions that has not been addressed. So, for example, employee housing in hotels. Palisades has 50 employees in hotels, and that was currently zoned for tourist accommodation units. Do they come out of the 940 bonus units, which I guess is now really 467, because Placer County actually has a huge percentage with Dollar Hill Crossing, Chalet Blanc. There's a conversion in Tahoe City. There's a lot of different TAU conversions that I don't know if TRPA is tracking. I have a lot of questions about conversions. I have questions about the just that we have inequity between the states. So Douglas County, I found that quite humorous that they have 84 feet of height already, and they didn't propose any affordable housing in a 40-unit luxury condo. Washoe County's done very little. Most of it has been in Placer County and the city of South Lake Tahoe. Our environmental community has thousands of members, and the public is glossed over. They are intelligent, knowledgeable people, and I think the public perception is at a very all-time low. Bifurcate out outside town centers and transition areas, and keep what was intended in every code ordinance and every plan and in the regional plan, that concentration of development goes into town centers. I think if you work with the public, you'll find that you have more support than you really think, but not the way it's going now. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah.
The next hand raised is Jim Lodge. Jim, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hey, this is Jim Tollins with the Labor Lodge, and I just wanted to voice some support for the TRPA for taking this issue seriously in the face of all this adversity. And just keep doing what you're doing. We support you, and we're excited to see these bold moves happening.
Thank you, Jim.
The next hand raised is Alex Sigdinos. Alex, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Thank you. Yeah, I would urge you to table the proposed plan area amendments pending an environmental impact assessment to gauge the cumulative impact of the proposed dramatic and town character altering height and density changes to the basin's town centers. And I'd ask you to consider these points. First, the Tahoe Basin does not have a dire shortage of housing units. What it does have is a shortage of housing units available to residents who seek to live and work here. For example, a family of 4 considering a brief vacation in Tahoe, whether they live in the San Francisco Bay Area, Los Angeles, Europe, or Asia, can choose from more than 5,000 licensed short-term rental listings, likely another 1,000 unlicensed, on STR platforms such as Airbnb and VRBO. A family of 4 looking for long-term rental in the basin might be lucky to find a few listings and likely not affordable. That just doesn't make sense. Capping or restricting STRs to commercial or mixed-use zones makes an immediate improvement to housing availability. The experience in South Lake with Measure T is that 10 to 15% of STRs converted back to long-term rentals. Back of the envelope math tells us that a similar measure basin-wide would yield 500 to 1,000 long-term units from 5,000 STRs. And this in a matter of months, not in years, without moving any dirt, tearing down or altering town centers, providing tax incentives or public subsidies, or requiring costly changes to infrastructure. This is very low-hanging fruit. If you're serious about workforce housing, you really have to take this action, regardless of any other initiatives you pursue. And I'd also like to underscore that the vast majority of basin residents and constituents, particularly those not associated with commercial development, the real estate business, their lobbyists or attorneys, oppose the proposed plan amendments. Again, if TRPA held a public referendum of Tahoe registered voters, this would fail. Again, that's not NIMBYism. Our legitimate concern is that the Tahoe Basin's infrastructure, fragile environment, and public safety, particularly related to wildfire risk and evacuation, will be overwhelmed by increased population density. Please get back to first principles and protect the lake and basin. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
2 more hands. Next one is Kathy Julian. Kathy, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Thank you for your time. First, I'm fully supportive of incentives to encourage workforce housing, but suggest that there's a need for more focus on rental housing, and I frankly don't see that coming out of these housing amendments. 2, the points made by the League to Save Lake Tahoe, Sierra Club, a map, all very good. And especially the point of we have 460 some units, bonus units out there. Why are we not looking at some pilot projects with incentives that can demonstrate that these incentives do work and calibrate it better if it doesn't work, but start more modestly and work from things that are proven. We have some developers out there who want to do things. Start more modestly rather than a basin-wide second phase housing amendment strategy. Also, make more clear the implementation language under your HS 3.1. Make clear if a local jurisdiction could suggest development standards that would avail of height, density, or coverage increases while introducing inclusionary requirements of less than 100% deed restriction. deed restricted units. If I'm misunderstanding this, please clarify in your discussion later. I agree with the comments on the need to revise the achievable housing definition, suggest to introduce some sort of income cap that still addresses the need of our missing middle, our teachers and firemen and nonprofit heads, whatever, but doesn't allow for remote workers who happen to work for someone with a business license here in the basin, but actually make $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 and can well afford housing without such incentives. Finally, I question some of the underlying assumptions that underlie these amendments, including that affluent local workers won't want a deed restricted property. I don't see where we have evidence of that. And also that TRPA has the capacity to monitor and enforce deed restrictions. That is not clear. It's not even clear if they're the appropriate body to be managing the monitoring and enforcement of deed restrictions. Frankly, their specialty is environment, and they should stay focused on environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy.
The next hand raise is Jennifer Vadenice. Jennifer, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Okay. Hi there. My name is Jennifer Vadene. I'm 37 years old. I grew up in North Lake Tahoe and lived there until I went off to college. My husband also grew up locally in Gardnerville and has been working as an engineer in Truckee for the past 14 years. We would have given anything to remain within the Tahoe area. We really were looking to purchase a home and raise our family, but we couldn't find anything affordable and really nothing, that had a yard for our kids or anything like that. So we ended up moving out to the Sierra Valley, not too far from the area, but the commute has been hard on both of us between juggling our kids and going to work. So while I am in support of workforce and affordable housing, I think that's a worthy goal. But from what I've read about the achievable housing, it's not going to be affordable even for two working professionals. Our mortgage now is under $2,000 a month, and we still struggle with all the other bills that we have to pay. So I just don't think it's going to be desirable. As well as families, they don't want to live in high-rise small apartments with children in the middle of town centers. We would have rented, but all the houses, it's impossible to rent up in Lake Tahoe. They seem now all be for short-term rentals, or they just sit vacant as second homes. So I really hope that the county and TRPA are doing something about that for other individuals like us that are in our situation. And I just love Lake Tahoe. My roots are there, but I'm very concerned about its future. So please do not allow the character and more rural nature of the North Shore to be changed with these dense and tall buildings and the areas outside of town that just have this unlimited density. These changes will never service the needs of my family or other families like ours, but yet they could change the look and feel of our beautiful area forever. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Two more hands are up. The next one is Sandy Sobas. Sandy, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Hi, this is Sandy Sobis from Alpine Corporation. We are developing achievable housing in the Tahoe Basin, and I support the code amendments that will fix the shortage of housing for the local workforce. I also just wanted to say that we want the workforce to live here, and we will make sure that the rents are affordable for them. We don't want to build apartments and have them too expensive for the workforce to afford. So thank you for your hard work, and I just wanted to say that I support what you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you, Sandy.
The last hand raised is Tony Karwowski. Tony, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Thank you very much. Tony Karwowski here from the North Tahoe Community Alliance. First off, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to speak, the Regional Planning Committee on the subject, and also just want to acknowledge TRPA staff for the brave and bold work of bringing these amendments forward for the basin. They are absolutely critical to counteract the housing, the workforce housing issues we're experiencing region-wide. There were a couple comments here. I think Jennifer summed up her experiences two callers ago. Having been brought up in the area and then having the unfortunate situation where she could not afford to keep living here. And personally, I've experienced this with friends in my 22 years of living here, and also family members having to move away, and it's very discouraging. I think we can do better as a leadership community to bring forward more amendments like these to create the workforce housing we need to attract and retain our critical workforce. One thing I hear from our members here at our TBID, our Tourism Business Improvement District, is just how significantly they need additional workforce. We have restaurants, retailers that are closed down midweek peak periods still, who just can't attract the staffing they need regionally to be open. This is ultimately going to reduce the amount of revenues those businesses make, and they're small businesses. These aren't large businesses. And they operate on smaller margins. And if those margins start to erode because they can't be open to sell their product, we as a community are going to be in a very, very bad situation. Another thing I'd like to point out here is Vinton Hawkins made a great analysis on a layer cake, and that these amendments are a very important part of the layer cake of the solutions that are being undertaken by many different organizations and many different parties around the lake. Earlier today, the TRPA heard a presentation on the Destination Stewardship Plan, which is a great example of a lot of different organizations around the lake coming together to cumulatively and collectively and collaboratively problem solve for the biggest issues in our community. And I just want to acknowledge again that these amendments are part of the solution. There are greater movements going on to help support that will interact with these amendments, things like transit, ensuring and enhancing transit in our region and making it more convenient, utilizing microtransit as well. We at the NTCA have also funded things like Placemate through Placer County to provide rental opportunity and subsidies to convert second homes and STRs into longer-term rentals. We've provided funding for the Workforce Housing Preservation Program for down payment assistance to create a secondary market of deed-restricted residences in the region, as well as we've also given additional funding to support Dollar Creek development for additional workforce housing in the region. So the point here that I'll leave you with is don't be short-sighted in what these amendments do. They are a very important part of the layer cake of solutions that are being brought to the region. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Tony.
We had one more hand go up. Judith Tornese, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Okay, thank you. I'm Judith Tornese, and I'm president of Friends of the West Shore. I'd like to supplement our letter of yesterday. Friends strongly supports the goal of affordable and workforce housing, but it seems that increased height and density will impact the area plans. And I do appreciate the earlier committee comments on that in this meeting. There is still concern and much confusion about how TRPA and area plans will interact. These issues will not be decided later. These issues will be decided later, and they're going to be approved now. The public doesn't know now which rules will apply. It's not fair to the public. The opt-out feature for Placer County in particular may or may not be used. Otherwise, area plans must comply with the TRPA density and height. The public doesn't know how their neighborhoods will be impacted, especially for height, density, traffic, and emergency evacuation. They're all related. So more time is needed to clarify and simplify this feature. Also, we have concerns about the insufficient parking and the impacts from that. We agree with the previous comment to keep affordable housing in town centers only and not outside town centers, at least for now. We agree also with the previous comment to eliminate achievable housing because it will not be affordable enough for most workers. We need assurance that the units will be affordable only and not no achievable or luxury units. So also other alternatives for affordable workforce housing should be analyzed to determine the most efficient way to provide such housing, such as better regulation of and a reduction of short-term rentals to provide more workforce and local housing. Providing subsidized housing, again, only for affordable housing, not for luxury condos. Utilizing land trusts, providing incentives to encourage home rentals to locals, etc. Other deed-restricted housing solutions should be explored that are consistent with the current zoning. So in conclusion, we need more environmental review to analyze these many impacts. We need an EIS, so urge you to please vote no until we get more information, preferably from an EIS. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judith.
The next hand raised is name on Zoom is TJ. TJ, if you can unmute and state your full name for the record, you can address the committee.
Hello, my name is Timothy J. Kellogg. Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
All right, great. I'd just like to say that I live and work in Tahoe and I support the code amendments for the Tahoe workforce. Definitely anything that's going to create more workforce housing is going to be a boon for our area. People like myself that have often struggled to find a place to live.
Great. Well, thank you, TJ.
The last hand raised is Suzanne Pecci. Suzanne, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
So my name is Suzanne Pecci, and I'm really tuning in on this rather late, but I've owned a property in Tahoe Vista for over 50 years across from the lake at a time when the homes in my area were summer homes only. So I've lived there in the best of times. I was very encouraged when TRPA was formed, and there was the concern for maintaining the absolute beauty of Lake Tahoe, the clarity, the clean air, everything about it that made it Lake Tahoe. I guess I'm really saddened with the casualness that I feel I'm hearing with these same local agencies that had been so supportive of the environment and the importance of maintaining everything about Lake Tahoe that actually made it Lake Tahoe. And you know, I have to just relate a personal experience with scenic views. We decided to put a 4-foot fence across the front of our property on North Lake Boulevard. We have an uphill lot, and in an area that required a 3-foot fence because of scenic concerns, scenic beauty concerns. It took a lawyer, a consultant, all of my uphill neighbors that wrote letters for me, all of the hoops we had to jump through in order to have TRPA and a local planning agency approve a 4-foot fence when I am surrounded by people that had 6-foot fences. I don't see that developers have to jump through any hoops for this. And I have worked for the Department of Housing. I worked in the Trouble Project Unit, where developer owned projects for low income were my job. Developers got very tired of not making the money they felt they needed to make. And my job was to try to keep low income units on the market for those that needed housing. So I am very active in politics in my area. I am a public member, and I understand the public not saying they haven't been involved. It is a problem in all areas where the public should be involved. The people that live there are certainly very capable of helping and making some of these very important monumental decisions that you're trying to make today. And so I stand with all of the groups that say, you know, let's look at this a little further. Let's consider what the public concerns are. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Mr. Chair, there are no more hands raised to comment on this item.
All right, then we'll close public comment and we'll go to committee member comments. We have someone here who is a guest to our committee now. She has rolled off this committee, and we appreciate all her past service. I can't believe you're not going to be here, but thank you for joining us today. Do you want to start out?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just looking through, listening to the public comment, looking through the Washoe Tahoe housing needs assessment. And when we did our study in 2001, in order to catch up with housing, we needed 790 units. In order to keep up, we needed an additional 415. And through 2026, it was recommended that we needed 1,205 units. And so I don't think that this is going to be built. There aren't even enough units to build those in Incline Village, but this is a start to support this type of housing. You heard from a developer who is in a multifamily zone that would benefit greatly from these housing changes. And after we did the study, the County Commission adopted the Washoe Tahoe housing roadmap this year, and are looking forward to making changes to our area plan. But this does help on some elements such as coverage, where TRPA already has the jurisdiction over Washoe County to support this type of housing that is so badly needed in the community. And I will touch on the short-term rental issue that we heard a lot of today. And I know it's not on our agenda, but I just feel like I need to touch on it as someone who's living it every day. I did bring to the board a cap on short-term rentals in August, and it did not pass by the County Commission. But I will tell you, in the study we did, even though caps were recommended, it was very clear it would only help with about 15% of the housing shortage that we're having, because these are families who are buying these homes as second homes, vacation homes, who still want to use these homes. So we are also enacting things such as PlaceMate at Washoe County, and have funded that program and are looking to move forward with it. But we see that this is something that needs to happen. And we had a really great discussion at our board yesterday on workforce housing initiatives, and the full board came forward with, yes, we want to see these happen countywide. And, you know, we want to see the county bring back these recommendations. And I see that our area plan will probably be adopted in about a year. So I just want to applaud the staff. I know the team has been working very hard to do outreach with the community. And I think it's just an admirable effort, and certainly something that needs to be undertaken, and probably undertaken a long time ago, but here we are. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I just realized that I forgot to go back to staff after public comment so that they can address anything that they heard that they feel needs more clarification. And then we'll resume board member or committee member comments. Sorry about that.
I can start and then pass it over to the team if they want to clarify anything.
There were a couple questions about whether conversions of like tourist units or commercial floor area would be eligible for bonus units. The answer is no. You can't convert a tourist unit to a bonus unit. So the 946 bonus units that we're talking about today, that stays.
Alyssa, can I just clarify that? The other point that was made there was some of the older motels that have been purchased and converted from TAUs to residential units, and those are not using bonus units either. That's just a conversion from a TAU to a residential unit. Correct. Correct. Right.
Well, actually, if I could clarify, if they are deed restricting it, then they can get bonus units from the bonus unit pool, but it draws down the pool. So it depends on whether they've used their existing TAU or whether they've gotten a bonus unit.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
There was also a question about, the implementation process, and John covered quite a bit of that, but in the code that is before you today, it would allow local jurisdictions to set their own standards that are different from what we're proposing in this package if they do have an approved inclusionary ordinance. Someone asked about that.
But they don't, you don't have to have an inclusionary zoning ordinance to do a opt-out system. It's an alternative.
Correct.
But if you want to allow any of these incentives for market rate, you have to have inclusionary. If you want to go bigger, basically you have to have inclusionary. If you want to go smaller, you just have to show that you're providing something that's equally financially feasible to what we're proposing.
But inclusionary is not the only way you can do it.
We have the bonus unit breakdown of the 946 on the slides, or on the slide. We break this down into bonus units that were allocated into the local jurisdiction pools during the community planning process. And then we also have a number of units that are already reserved for projects that are in the permitting process. And I do want to know that this is a little confusing, but the number that are in the local jurisdiction pools, those also include some projects that are in the permitting process. So the 460 number that was being thrown around, that does include the projects that are going through the permitting process and have either reserved bonus units or are hoping to reserve bonus units from us soon. I think that's it for me for clarifications. I'll pass it over.
There were some concerns that all of these units would go towards achievable, and our bonus unit pool is split half and half. So half of the units have to be reserved for affordable or moderate, and the remaining can be used for achievable. If we run out of affordable, sorry, I misspoke. Half of them have to be reserved for affordable. The other half can be used for moderate achievable. If we start to run out of affordable, we will pull from the achievable pool, but they can't go from affordable into the achievable pool. And actually, most of the projects that we have permitted or reserved units for so far are actually deed restricted affordable. About 40% of them have been, oh, sorry, I did the math and I was going to look at it and tell you the actual numbers. 366 are for deed restricted affordable and 209 have been reserved for achievable so far. There was a comment that these projects could go above tree line. That is not allowed. We have a finding that prevents that. There was also a comment that public comments are not on the website. Public comments are on the website. They're under the staff report, so people may just need to look for the link. And let's see, was there anything else? I think those are all the comments that I want to clarify.
I had one other one before. Do you have a question? Okay. I had one other one before I push it over to John Marshall to respond to the environmental questions. Somebody mentioned that having stormwater systems would not be compatible with the NPDES permits or MOUs on the Nevada side. If you look at the code in your packet, page 230 and page 234, in both cases, it has to be publicly, a public entity has to take responsibility for it, has to meet our requirements, and has to be approved by either Lahontan or NDEP, depending on which state it's in. So obviously they're the NPDES permit and MOU people, so they don't approve of it. It doesn't work. So I wanted to address that one. Karen caught a couple of the other ones I was going to address, and I'll pass it to John.
Sorry, as we're moving down the line here, John Marshall, I just wanted to talk very briefly about the environmental analysis. First, some people are asking for alternatives analysis that doesn't attach to an IEC. It's only when you get to an environmental assessment or an environmental impact statement, EA or EIS, that you need to do alternative analysis. Although there has been a lot of alternative analysis, it's just not in that kind of form, because what we're doing here is essentially taking some low-hanging fruit and moving on to other options as we go to phase 3. Now, just talking about the adequacy of the environmental rule and all of our findings, remember what the scope of what we're talking about is very limited. So we're talking about, first, this only applies to the bonus units that are left. Right now, those bonus units can be utilized in these areas. So it's not that these are new units to these areas that are new. It's just how those units are going to be distributed within that already existing approved area. And as we mentioned earlier, these will incentivize units to be moved into town centers. They can be used outside of centers, but that'll be more difficult to satisfy the requirements. And remember also that each individual project will need to go through project level findings that will address things, site-specific items like, if there is any conformity findings that need to be found with local heights of buildings. There's local scenic standards, not local, but individual project level scenic standards that have to be made. So you can't block views of the lake or bridge lines. You can't be above the tree canopy, et cetera. So when you look at all those restrictions, that's what the IEC looks at, is, are there any remaining impacts that are significant? And that's the analysis that we went through. And so essentially we're finding that if you, for example, connect into a area-wide treatment center, it will mitigate the additional coverage that you can place in those limited instances. So that's the kind of analysis that we went through. We've made all the regular findings that we make all the time with code amendments. So all those are in your packet. So there are not any missing findings. And my recommendation is you can rely on the IEC. We're going to add some additional language that addresses some of the concerns identified by the League regarding, the applicability of this analysis to other potential efforts in the future. And so we feel that we've got a pretty solid IEC here.
Great, thank you. Now we'll go back to committee member comments. So if anyone has any, Cindy?
Yes, I had a couple. Another point that I think that the public, several members of the public in addressing us and in their letters isn't clear on is, what is the achievable definition and what are those restrictions? And I'm very clear on it because I worked with the Mountain Housing Council and Placer County when we adopted this and used Vail, Colorado's kind of definition for that. But Karen, would you mind going back into, it's not just that you work in the local community. You can't work for, and I'm sorry to pick on Amazon or Google or Zoom or whoever, you can't work for an out-of-basin employer remotely here and get a qualification as a
Correct.
needed local worker?
Right. So to qualify for the achievable, at least one member of the household has to work at least 30 hours a week or more for an employer who has a business or tax address in the Tahoe Truckee region.
We were very intentional on that when we looked at it because we knew many of our teachers, firefighters, and other young professionals who are dual income families make too much to qualify for what is truly called affordable housing. And we heard that time and time again. And one of the members of the public spoke to the Hopkins Village issue. That's a for sale product, an ownership model outside the Tahoe Basin. And even then, given supply chain and cost of construction, the developer is saying they can't sell them for as little as they need to make them truly affordable for our local workforce. But that we've learned a lot through that process. And I want to commend staff not only for the 4 years they've worked on this, but 7 or 8 years you've been serving with me and various capacities on the Tahoe Truckee Mountain Housing Council that really studied in depth what it was going to take, because we recognized that truly affordable tax, and that comes with tax subsidy, tax credits for developers at varying levels, that we had very few employees, or not as many employees as we thought we had, who would truly qualify for those units. And that's why we looked at this broader range, trying to capture people of all income levels that were working in our community for our community. And I know we've heard the public confused about that, but I really urge you to look at the Mountain Housing Council website, look at these definitions, because a lot of thought from a lot of leaders went into that discussion. And it is essential. Various pockets in our basin have more employees at service level. Other pockets in our community have people in more what we would call middle class. And that's where we've lost so much of our North Shore population, far in excess of what South Shore has lost as far as percentages of lost income. And what's been the driver of that is our housing values. Those of us who got to buy, we're doing well. If you look at our equity, we may not feel on a day-to-day basis we can tap that equity, but our housing values, a young employee or any employee coming into the basin could not buy my house today on an income that I was able, to earn and live and purchase my home. And that's why my sons are all living outside the basin. And I look at it and I go, this is a really sad state when people that want to work and live in our community can't be here. So the other thing I wanted to mention on town center boundaries. Town center boundaries are very different community to community. And if you look at the entire West Shore from Emerald Bay North, you have a very narrow strip and a very small strip in Tahoe City. That is our town center boundary. It is basically one property wide straddling the highway. We don't have depth, and we don't have much, if any, I'm trying to think of any vacant parcels in that area of our town center. So it is going to take tearing down existing structures and building new structures. We've looked at every way to incentivize housing, and we're doing lease to locals. We're funding that. We're putting more money into our workforce housing preservation program, purchasing homes, and we're doing everything we can to try to change that market or offer alternatives, because we can't tell people who to sell their house to. If they can sell their home, they're going to, and many of my friends retired and sold their homes and moved out of the area, and they made and they're very happy. They made a great deal of money on their property investment in Tahoe, and they sold to a second homeowner. That took it out of a local employee. These were local employees I worked with who retired, sold their homes and moved on. And so that's the case study that we all have our different perspectives we come to this position on. But having lived and worked here for 40 years, that's what I've seen, that transition. Because there's no new development in the Tahoe Basin or very limited new development, housing prices have skyrocketed. And so now we're trying to come in as government. We're not good as government at trying to develop houses, but trying to find incentives to incentivize those who can build homes cheaply to try to do that and make it economical and make our dollars. If we looked at, I think Placer County's numbers in the Mountain Housing Council were something like 2,000 units that were needed. And this includes the valleys and the Martis Valley area as well. You know, multiply that by right now going rate to deliver an affordable housing unit is over $500,000. We can't possibly afford that. So that's why we're looking at all these incentives. And I think that's important for the public to realize that we're not going to get near to the numbers we need by anything we're doing. And that's already been shown. These bonus units have been out there. I loved Lou's comments because I wasn't aware of that. We've only used 500 of the units that have been available since 1987 to move the needle on this issue. With 900 left, divided out around the basin, how many projects is that to the area? Not much. And yet it is being portrayed as if it's going to dramatically change our communities. And I hear that fear and I'm very concerned about it. And I'm very supportive of the opt-out program because then it lets the local jurisdiction determine where and how much and coming up with what they're willing to do and what the community wants to do to subsidize that. If we can't, to make it feasible, if we can't allow that next story, then are you willing, local community, to help fund? And that's who makes that decision, the local taxpayers that I represent. So there are balances there that we then can incentivize on. And I think finally I guess my last comment is to staff and many of the public commenters. I was reading through and glancing at some of their letters as they were speaking and reiterating their points in their letters. I think the confusion can be clarified. Make phone calls, ask our staff. I think that our staff have been more than willing to meet with anyone and discuss this and explain it. And I'm thank you for doing that because I know it's challenging. You feel like you answer the same questions repeatedly because somebody puts something out and says, oh, a studio apartment is going to be mandated to cost $2,400 a month. And that's just not the case, you know, and I think that's one of the numbers that's floating around out there that makes people afraid that we're not building for local workers. We are. That's the whole intent, the whole spectrum of those local workers, and let the tax credit financing projects move forward. They won't need as much subsidy because they get the tax credits and they use that subsidy. But for those middle income earners, how can we help young people get their foot in the door and start toward home ownership? And I think we've got that breadth of programs by many of the local jurisdictions. Oh, I know. One last point. Then I'll be done, Vince. Short-term rentals. In 1989, we had a group come to the Tahoe Basin called the RUDAC Group, and they did a transportation study way back then for the Resort Triangle. At that time, Placer County had over 3,000 TOT certificates. Today, we have 3,200 short-term rentals. I know it feels people are more impacted. Potentially they're used more. Maybe they know more people. But the number has not changed dramatically. And I think that's so important for us to remember that tourism has always been a part of our area. Vacationers, that's why people came to Tahoe to recreate from the very start of Airman Mansion and Valhalla and the summer homes that crept up around the lake. That was who came here. was to recreate and to do those things. And that's part of our dynamic. Many want to forget that part of our history, and I don't blame them. Sometimes I mean, I want neighbors back. I want full-time. I want the community I moved to. I'm sad for that. And I hope these efforts will help. But just a point I wanted to make. So thank you. And I do support, as long as we have that opt-out option for a year to really address these issues and craft it to the local jurisdictions, I can support this. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Cindy. I see Shelley
And as
going
long
through
as
your
we-
notes.
we can clarify the opt-out provision and include it in the list of amendments to our code. I just had a question. Whoever wants to answer it may do so on page 230. Maybe Alyssa, since you've worked hard on this, under HS-3.1. I'll let you get to that page. Are you there? Okay. When you're looking at the original language, is there any reason why we used low instead of affordable and neglected to include achievable? Because the new language that follows doesn't use that terminology except for moderate. It uses affordable, moderate, and achievable, not low, moderate, and then there's no achievable. So I'm just kind of looking for consistency.
You're asking about why we're using low instead of affordable.
Right.
I think that this is in line with the way that our terminology for the goals and for the rest of the goals and policies in the housing element. I can take a look through and get back to you as we're going through other questions.
Okay, no, that's fine. I just think that we need to be consistent because people are already incredibly confused.
Yeah.
So let's not add to it. And then down below under subparagraph B, we allude to alternative standards, but we don't define, what local jurisdictions might do as an option to opting out. We go into quite a bit of detail on page 131. I'm just suggesting that we incorporate some of these 4 instances in the code. You've got inclusionary housing under, no, that's not the, no, you don't have that. That's under a subsequent policy statement. But for example, zoning additional areas for multifamily, acquiring donated land, public subsidies, installation of area-wide stormwater systems. I just think that specificity is important in terms of defining what some of those alternative standards might be. And I think they need to be embedded in the code. That's just my opinion. I don't know if you agree with that or not.
Yeah, and just to clarify, would you like to see that in the code language or in the regional plan language?
Wherever you'd like to, I just like to.
Okay.
In the final version, because the staff report was very detailed, and I appreciate the detail in the staff report. On page 232, under 13.5.3.1, I'll let you get there. You might want to, in the second line, it says the maximum height shall be no greater than 65 feet, provided the additional height is stepped back 1 foot for each additional foot of height above 56 feet, right? That's what we're doing. So, because we have no standard against which to measure that. So you might want to insert above 56 feet. And then down below under C, subparagraph C, again, there's you allude to alternative standards that are effective, but I think again, we need to elaborate on what those standards are. So whenever you're ready, I'll move on. Just a couple more. Page 236 under 34.4.1, all the way down, last line, it says, it's the last sentence actually on that page. The applicant may demonstrate compliance through parking management strategies, including but not limited to executed shared parking agreements or providing, comma, I think something's missing, or providing car sharing or providing something, because then it just goes on to unbundling parking and rent or contributing to alternative transportation methods. So you might want to look at that. And
yep.
Yeah, and that appears actually elsewhere in the code. There's some duplicate language that's also missing. something. But I'll let you find that because I don't think I marked it. Yes, I did. Actually, it's on page 252. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. Jessica?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to start by echoing, I think, what everybody else has said here, but really thanking staff for all your hard work. This has been so many years of work, and I think that it's easy from the outside to forget that. And I also want to recognize and acknowledge the fact that you all live and work in this area and have to interact with the folks who maybe are vehemently opposed to what you're working on way more frequently than a lot of us do, with maybe accepting Cindy, who's also in the area and in her other role. I don't diminish how challenging that can be, and how much I appreciate how much effort you all put into getting it right, regardless of sort of the noise. And I'm not saying that public commenters are noise. I'm saying the noise is the friction, right? Where we're not finding common ground, that creates noise. And I really wanted to thank you and state my appreciation for that as a former public employee. And then I just wanted to say, I really also appreciated at the beginning of the presentation, bringing it back to why we're looking at what we're looking at, what the agency's mission is, what our scope is, what our authority is to do, and how these changes do tie back to environmental improvements. And I think that's really important to keep at the forefront of our focus as we discuss it and move forward, and what the data says about these kinds of changes. You know, so much of in my other role on the TTD board, so much of what we spend time talking about is the feasibility of building out transit, right? If you build it, they will come, but it's also a chicken and the egg situation, right? You know, if people can still find ample excuse to use their own private vehicles, will they take transit? So bringing people into more densely populated areas is such a benefit to the transit discussion, which is so huge to what we're doing, right? We're, we spent this morning in the governing board meeting talking about real issues of pollution and trash. But when we're talking about like people picking up dog waste versus reducing thousands of miles of VMT every year, if not more, there's a big impact from some of these changes. And I really appreciate staff tying it back to that. It's a good reminder. And that's sort of what I'm carrying forward with me as we hopefully approve these for sending to the governing board today, because I really think that, as Member Hill mentioned, this is a long time coming. I mean, for more than 10 years, family and friends have been getting pushed out of the basin. It's not a new problem. It's not just 2020 to today. It's not just short-term rentals. It's everything. It's someone who owns a home deciding, I want to live in that home now. And so it's no longer a rental property, and or just not enough of the right kind of accommodation units. You know, if you have lots of housing, but it's single family homes, and you have a lot of single individuals who only need an apartment sized home, but you don't have a lot of apartments. And that's been happening for a long time. And I think that it's easy to get trapped in the larger, frankly, national policy discussions of wages and housing costs in the last 50 years in America. And that happens all over the place. But what we can do is what we're doing here. Like these are things we have control over. We don't have control over whether employers bring wages up to match, and who people, as Cindy said, who people sell their houses to. I'm usually the last person in the conversation to bring up private property rights, but there's only so much we can do about telling people what to do with their own personal property outside of the bounds of our code. So I just wanted to state those things for the record, to kind of give some background on why I'm supporting these measures and why I think they're so important and why they are hopefully going to be really effective, but not too effective. As we've said, we're not going to have 946 units in 5 years.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank
could
you.
I respond to that?
Yes.
I know there wasn't really a question, but I just, on behalf of staff, I want to thank you and the rest of the committee and the whole board, because it means a lot to us that you guys support what we're doing. And, you know, I said 16 months ago, we had a workshop with you all and you said, go big. It's good for us to know that the board wants us to do those things, because sometimes it's not all that clear. And you're right, it is hard, particularly for the folks who have to deal with irate neighbors and so forth. Cindy, like you said, Cindy knows. And so we really appreciate your support.
Thanks,
Thank you.
John. James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. James Settlemyer for the record. Sometimes we always forget to do that for the record. We have to remember we have a lot of people out there online. And in the previous meeting and all through this, I think it'd be wise if we all try to remember that. That being said, I appreciate the comments that were made today. I also want to put out there and ask the question of legal, if this decision is made by the TRPA, and if for some reason it ran too successful, we would be able to adjust. We don't have to leave it in place for a lifetime or 10 years or 5 years. We could choose as a body to come back and say that we made a mistake and we could change that, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer.
Thank you. Any other comments or
That
questions?
was John Marshall for the record.
John Marshall in the affirmation. We can change it. Oh, I forgot. Yeah, Alex online.
Yeah, thanks. And sorry I couldn't be there in person. I just wanted to, thank all of you for the discussion. Thank all the members of the public for engaging this. There was so many comments that poured in, and it was great to be able to, hear from so many diverse stakeholders. I am probably going to abstain on this one just because it sounds like there's been so much background and so many previous discussions that since I just joined the board, I was not able to participate in. So I don't think I can fully grasp all the implications and the process to date, but do have a few outstanding concerns. I think it was mentioned earlier what went into the definition of achievable, and it sounds like that was very, kind of painstaking, and there's a lot of thought behind that. But I do want to just be sure that we're able to verify and enforce whatever that definition is to ensure that it actually is going to the right people. I just would be concerned if there was any loopholes that could be kind of exploited to get people into housing that we're really not trying to prioritize. I think, really trying to focus on the low and moderate income individuals is a priority. And then I think there was some comments from the league about, not creating additional coverage for parking. I think that's really important as well. And, I'd like to better understand, when we wouldn't be limiting this to town centers, why that's important. I think there was, another comment earlier about places like Tahoe City where the town center is really small and tight. So I can understand when there'd be kind of exceptions to the rule there, but don't want that to be cast too widely in other contexts. So again, really appreciate all the work that seems like has gone into this and all the discussion that's happened today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to suggest that we try to have a little bit of briefing between now and the board meeting with Alex, because she'll have to vote on it, or it will be up for vote for the full board then. So
That would be great. Happy to spend any amount of time. I know the staff is, and I am as well, if you have questions.
Yeah, I would welcome that. Thank you.
Great. Did you want to address the multifamily zone? Because I know that's a big issue for you guys.
Sure, yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. So this is Karen Fink for the record. As Supervisor Gustafson mentioned, the town center areas were mainly drawn around our commercial areas, and we already have a lot of areas that are zoned multifamily. And one thing I want to point out is that
throughout our multifamily zones and bonus unit boundary, which is actually even bigger than multifamily. That's the area that's within walking distance to transit. That's where we've already decided that we want to incentivize bonus units and smaller units. And so even if we don't adopt any changes to multifamily today, we could still build all 946 of these units as accessory dwelling units, 1,200 square foot accessory dwelling units throughout that area. And what we're trying to do with these amendments is they're really focused on actually getting smaller units and making the same amount of units, but just making them more financially feasible by allowing more flexibility at the parcel level. So we're actually anticipating that if these are successful, each unit would have less coverage than it could today because we'll be incentivizing duplexes and triplexes. Another thing that we heard actually that really came out of that flash vote survey, and some of the commenters mentioned it, is that the most preferred type of housing are duplexes through fourplexes or tenplexes, and the most likely areas that we are going to get that is in the multifamily. In town centers, those are bigger parcels. We're really likely to get larger buildings there, and we've really heard that we need a diversity of housing types. We don't just want to have all of our housing in, really small units in, not that they're going to be huge buildings, but we need a diversity of housing types. So that's one reason why we think that it's pretty important to keep the multifamily piece in. And with the protections that we have, with the elements that we've added about tying into a stormwater system or ensuring, we heard the concerns about BMP maintenance. We have added in elements that require that local jurisdictions would have to oversee the maintenance of those BMPs. Those were some of the things that we added to, hopefully address those concerns.
Great, thank you. Any other committee member comments? Shelley?
Karen, with respect to achievable, I'm assuming this was based on an example. I think Cindy alluded to the fact that, it was based on what's being done elsewhere in the country. Is there a reason why we don't tie that to an income level?
Yeah, and Karen Fink again for the record. Thanks. I did want to address the achievable a little bit more based on some of the questions. So we previously had it tied to an income level. Last year, since we created it in 2018, it was tied to the income level that was the income level that you needed in order to afford the median priced home. And so that as home prices started skyrocketing, we were discovering that that percentage was getting really high in some places. It was as high as 540% in Washoe County, and there was no worker requirement. So we were finding that actually we felt, incentivized remote, just remote or people taking advantage of the system. So we looked to other areas. Summit County and also Placer County had decided to move away from the income cap and instead go to just the workforce cap. But, we have been hearing, and I appreciate the commenters bringing this up, this concern that these could become, developers will just see this as an invitation to build really large units and will start attracting maybe workers from other areas but they still make a lot of money, or they, are just finding a way to use these units. And so we have been talking about potentially a way to have a requirement that an achievable project come in for a staff level review to ensure that the size of the units aligns with the actual need that are shown in those regional needs assessments. So the regional needs assessments really clearly talk about what size of units we need to meet the regional needs. So that would give staff the opportunity to, early on reject a project that's trying to come in as a really large project.
Do you think we need to bake that into the code?
Yeah.
I think that'd be good. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Sorry for preempting our
That's
conversation.
okay. And I wanted to also congratulate staff. Obviously, I've been vacillating on this because I understand and sympathize with some of the concerns. I think it's kind of the fear of the unknown. But I do want to congratulate staff on, as a former local public official, TRPA in recent years has done, I think, an exemplary job of cooperating with local jurisdictions. I mean, people who serve on these boards and commissions have a tough job. You know, they are not only closer to the people, they're as a result more accessible to the people as a general rule. And it can be pretty, you know, demanding at times. But, you know, I'm sure that I think that Vince, our chairman, and this is Shelley Aldine for the record. I just wanted, you may be touching on, you know, some of the mandates that have come down from California on affordable housing projects. And I just handed him, and he can go into greater detail, something I found online about some of the fines, about, I mean, local jurisdictions who don't comply, you know, I presume within a certain length of time can be fined up to $100,000 a month for non-compliance. They can lose their permitting authority. You know, they can end up in court receivership. They can be sued by a myriad of people. They can be sued by the state. Developers can sue them, third parties can sue them, individuals can sue them. So, you know, they're in a tough spot. And there's things that they may not have voluntarily implemented if it weren't for these state requirements. I think they probably would have eventually found a way of providing more affordable housing, because I think they all embrace the importance of affordable housing in their communities, and because they represent the people who are striving to make a living and find a decent place to live. But I just wanted to say that I appreciate TRPA's willingness to continue to partner in good faith with local government. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other?
Yeah, I wanted to go back on this housing, the achievable housing, because I do agree that there could be some more clarification. And I'm thinking of an example where maybe, I mean, I think there's always a way around every rule we run. If there's one thing I've learned being a local government official, there's always ways around whatever we write and what our intentions are, no matter how great our intentions are. And so what we did in Placer County with the 30 hours a week for a locally based employer was really critical to trying to get to that next level of income that so many of our younger couples and families were getting to, where they were exceeding subsidy levels that were there for others. By doing that, though, I suppose you could have somebody who, one of the partners is making a great living somewhere else, and here's an individual working just them 30 hours a week just so they can qualify for this. Where we've seen that potentially questioned was where we were giving people $150,000 down to buy a local house, right? And then we started to hear about some of the gamesmanship. Well, gee, I have a local office. My office is for a nationwide company, but I have this local office. And so therefore, give me the $150,000 to help me buy this house. You know, certainly that's not our intent. And in these units, primarily we're talking, and I hope we're seeing rentals, because that is where we're so deficient. And more than likely somebody in those upper brackets that people are talking about is not going to want to rent in a duplex or a 4-plex or a 10-plex that is structured for local housing. You know, frankly, that isn't where they want to live and choose to live. So be thoughtful of that. I'm not sure I can think here what those maximums might be or how we might look at those projects, but I can see that as a fear and another workaround, and you never know until you adopt something how many different workarounds people will come to you with. But clearly our intent is to do that. And my other question was on the stormwater. Are we requiring, I understand residential BMPs are, you know, whether they're monitored after your permit is closed out and how effective they are. And so I understand the league's concern about that. I'm more familiar with having done public infrastructure and stormwater interceptors and mechanical treatments, and those are very effective, especially when the local government can change out the cartridge, clean it out. Is that what we're looking at in these other areas? Or are we looking at truly just the BMP, the trenches? With
the answer is yes and yes.
Okay.
And let me explain that. In both cases, the first option is the stormwater infrastructure like you talked about. And that is, you're right, most effective and
Mhm.
It's a utility.
Mhm.
And, but what we know is that in some jurisdictions, and I think Alyssa or Karen can talk to you about South Lake Tahoe, and I know from discussions with Washoe folks, the way they're trying to meet their pollution load reduction clarity credits is through BMPs, parcel by parcel. And for Incline Village to do what we're talking about, they probably have to retrofit the whole village with another whole utility system. So one of the options is, can you create a public district, say IVGID did it or Washoe County did it, that says every property in this district is going to get their BMPs maintained by paying an annual fee or a monthly fee or whatever into this district. And that's part of how they get their pollutant load reduction credits. And so that's an option we've left open. We had some people at the APC say, well, yeah, conceivably that could happen, but I doubt if it will. But then we've had some couple of these local governments say, we're thinking about it. So that's why we left it there. And I don't know if somebody wants to add to that.
Well, compared to I can't speak for Nevada jurisdictions, but California, we are under these mandates to achieve housing. And so local governments are going to play a role, sometimes in land acquisition to help facilitate. Even with that, it's a very slow process. Others direct subsidies. So playing a role in stormwater management and in delivery of transit systems and all these other factors, that's certainly something I think that we're obligated to do to make this work. So give that some thought as well as to how we might address some of the league's concerns with that, especially, and I'm biased. I know much more about North Shore and Tahoe City. There's probably only 1 or 2 parcels in Tahoe City that we're even talking about being able to be used for any of this. And in both of those circumstances, I think our community would want and the county would want to participate in maintenance of that facility. One is outside of the current urban water, stormwater plan that's in the ground and we worked on. One is within it. So it could take a different form, but in either case, I think local government is going to be playing a role in addressing these needs.
Yeah, and John Hester for the record before, and this time.
That was Cindy Gustafson for the record, sorry.
One of the things that we internally are really excited about across the agency is the multiple benefits of this. You know, stormwater infrastructure, we're on the edges of an outstanding national resource. Water is long overdue. And having the kind of density that we can start looking at different modes of transportation being feasible, you know, that's really important. Then of course, housing, which is why we're here. So it's at least in 3 different areas, it's a benefit. And I didn't even mention BMT. So we're excited about that and want to help our local government partners as much as we can to get all those. And there may be times when we get a transportation grant or a water quality grant or something like that, that also will help with housing and transit. So we see a big upside to this whole thing.
Thank you. Any other committee member comments? All right, I have a few comments and clarifications. Vince Henigman for the record. These are related to, things that we've discussed with other people. And I heard in the written comments that people submitted and people have talked about. People have been worried about this enforcement of the BMPs. And I know you guys have have talked about it a little bit. In the document, it lays out 2 years of enforcement funded, and then that we're going to look at in phase 3 on a permanent funding mechanism for enforcement of the BMP. So I just wanted to ask if you could kind of clarify that a little bit for the record.
Sure, Karen Fink. That's actually funding for enforcement of deed restrictions. So one of the things when we brought the amendment to the achievable definition forward in April of this year, the board directed us to include a funding source for the enforcement. And so we have set aside $20,000 for this year and for next year to bring on a third-party consultant to certify and do the actual monitoring of the deed restrictions and audit the other deed restrictions, and also to make recommendations on how we can improve the program as a whole. So that is in place for 2 years. Definitely there had been conversation around making sure that we have a sustainable funding source over time that is ongoing, to ensure that we have ongoing funding for enforcement, because that is a big concern and we definitely need to make sure we can enforce these. And so we feel that these 2 years of funding will get us to well into the middle of phase 3. And phase 3 is really designed actually to look at that kind of thing, like a sustainable source of funding that, wouldn't just be attached to the deed restricted units themselves. Potentially, we don't want to just add more costs to deed restricted units, but we do want to make sure that we're assessing fees fairly. So that would give us the time to develop that and really work it into the system.
And if I could add just quickly, we're also part of the responsibilities of the legal team will go up as we do more deed restrictions, hopefully. And so that's part of the justification for adding another attorney to help out with that increased load.
Great, thank you.
This is John Hester. I want to add to that too. The reason we didn't look at a fee was if the fee is tied to, say, development, and we have a couple recession years, what happens to our program? So we want to get something it's kind of more like an operation and maintenance fee than a one-shot development related fee.
Great. So yeah, if we could just have that all clarified in the, proposal before it goes to the governing board, that'd be great. And I'm realizing I need better glasses because, all right. The next thing, let's see, with the BMPs for the multifamily area, from going back and forth with the league and others, I think we came to a conclusion that the incentives only should apply in areas with publicly owned stormwater management systems, or areas where privately owned BMP construction and maintenance are enforced by a public agency with a indefinite funding strategy to ensure future compliance. And that could be TRPA or a local jurisdiction. So I think we just need to clarify that language just to make sure that that's in there, and that gives people confidence that, the BMPs will do the work that we need them to. We heard a lot of people talk about wildfire and evacuation planning. And let's see, we know that you guys have worked with the fire chiefs and safety professionals and consulted with them greatly on this. And I think a lot of that just needs to be put into the document. Currently, there's nothing under that in the CEQA checklist on page 164, and that was something critical that some people wanted to see in there, because we know you've done the work. I think we have confidence that you've done the work because we've heard about the work, and we just need to document it so other people see that. And what part of that is that fire marshals will be required to approve every project based on fire safety and evacuation, among other things. That is just a rule in every project. We get that everywhere. It's the same up here. And I'd like to ask that we require jurisdictions to update their fire safety and evacuation plans when updating their area plans, especially when considering these amendments. Also paying extra attention to the evacuation of people who may not have cars, since we are creating housing that might not require parking, so that we can ensure that their safety has been thought through. Um,
Can I respond to that?
sure.
Um, I don't know that local governments necessarily deal with evacuation through their area plans. You may remember when the fire chiefs and the law enforcement people were here, they do that typically through an incident command system, which is modeled from from John Hester for the record, from the federal, state, and regional and local levels. And so I don't know, that would be redundant probably for them to add it into their area plans, but we can certainly.
I think they have to do it as part of their CEQA findings for updating their plans, possibly. I can't remember. This was
Their
from
general plans.
their general plans, not their
Okay.
area plans.
Correct.
Okay. So what would be a good mechanism to ensure that those plans, I mean, because we have no authority over fire or safety people, organizations in the basin, right?
Right.
Is there any?
Well, John,
I think I think you've heard a couple of times at the full board, Kat McIntyre talk about this. And I think that's really the mechanism and her efforts to get, fire planning within the basin. And I don't know, Julie, if you want to talk about that, but that's, I think, the appropriate place for that kind of plan level response rather than in these amendments.
Area plans. So do we just use the timing of when that's done, that we convene with those people to make sure that they've taken into consideration these changes and the potential for people without automobiles?
go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Julie Reagan, TRPA Director. Actually, tomorrow there is a meeting of it's called the MAC group. It's the Multi-Agency Coordinating Council of Fire Chiefs. And Kat McIntyre is representing TRPA there. And I think we can commit to work off those through those other channels with that group, with the first responders and the fire chiefs, just to get a better sense of how we can help support them, support the grant funding that often is required to update those plans. And there's already a lot of work going on in that space. So we can get back to you on that.
Okay, that'd be great.
And
Sorry.
a little more detail is, you may or may not remember when Kat led a presentation that had the fire chiefs and sheriffs here.
Yeah.
And I forgot who on the board said, what exactly can we do to help you?
Yeah.
And they said two things. One is help us set up emergency communications for evacuation, particularly identify the people that need transportation assistance. It's kind of an IT, intelligent transportation system, which we think would be great also for destination stewardship and all that. And the other is prioritize forest thinning projects along evacuation routes, which our EIP group addresses. So those are the kind of things I think will be more meaningful, is to work, like Julie said, through those kinds of improvements through the MAC, instead of making somebody put something in a plan.
Okay, I guess, I've just been asked a lot about that for making sure that those people are considered in their needs, and that if we are going to allow, this level of density perhaps in some of our core areas, that it's at least, reconsidered those plans. So if we could work with those people, I think it'd just be good to put in there. I didn't know the proper levers. You guys will know the proper levers to pull to make that happen, but I think we need to
We
get something
certainly
in
can
there.
speak to that in the staff report going to the full board.
Okay, great. And let's see, on parking, I think you guys already mentioned that you are changing the parking requirement to use the language that the league had. I would like to ask that the parking be unbundled for affordability. So if people are providing parking, if say you're a renter, you can pay for your apartment. And if you need a parking space, you can pay for your car space. It just allows people to self-select what they want, and to go down to an even greater level of affordability, because a parking spot has been estimated to cost about $400 a month in rent which is not insignificant. Let's see.
Can I just ask a clarifying question about that? So right now we have listed unbundling of parking as something that an option that a developer could do to, as one of the things that they're doing to meet parking need. Are you saying you would like us to codify that all of these projects need to require unbundled parking?
Oops. I guess I'd ask you, most of the cities that I've read about changing their development ordinances to require a lot less parking or even have parking maximums have required it to be unbundled. So I was assuming that that would be preferable. I can't imagine why a developer would choose to have it tagged to specific units. Can you think of a positive reason? Anyone?
No, I can think of a negative reason, but it's more of that's a level of detail I'm not certain that we want to get into in terms of trying to enforce that requirement for unbundling. I think it's an option. It's good as an option to satisfy the parking analysis to get to lower parking ratios. So I would kind of keep it as is.
Okay.
And we, but maybe we can put some thought into if there's some way to strengthen the incentive as opposed to mandate it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. A fair point that it would just be something else we'd have to have to monitor and enforce. And if they are allowed, I think developers would do that because it gives them more flexibility with doing their units. So the next thing is, which is something that we've talked about internally and it has been mentioned a little bit, is to ask for a TRPA staff review of projects to ensure that, first of all, unit sizes are compatible with affordable housing. So we aren't getting luxury units. That's not to say we won't get some 3 bedrooms because we do want to provide affordable units for families, but we don't get all 4 and 5 bedroom units. And 2, that the building scale is compatible with surrounding areas. Is especially critical in those multifamily and transition areas. And 3, that the architecture is appropriate. I think we've been talking about modern or old Tahoe in style, something that's appropriate to the area. And so then the last thing that I wanted is a suggestion that came from Leah Kaufman on the definition for affordable housing, achievable housing. A lot of people have expressed concern about that. And I think we're all, we do want to tighten that. Someone will always find a way to get around it, but we want to tighten up those loopholes as much as possible. And the definition that she shared from Colorado, I think, tightened it up so that you couldn't just have someone with a PO box in the basin. You actually had to have a physical location and be working physically in the basin. And I think that closes off a couple of those things. So those were the changes or clarifications that I wanted. I thought, about addressing some of the things that I heard from in those comments and people speaking to us today. I think they do feel like some people have expressed it, that they aren't being heard or we're not listening to them and their ideas. And I want to assure the public that we read everything, we listen to everything, and all these things have been considered. The big difference in what we're doing, which is very different from what most government agencies do, is we actually brought someone in to see if it would work. Most government agencies set a policy and they negotiate back and forth, and sometimes they end up making no economic sense. When we did our walking tour of Kings Beach, Kevin, we were talking after the tour, one of our leaders, and he said, we have such a great plan, but nothing's happened in years. And that just means it doesn't make any economic sense. No one's going to do it if it doesn't make sense. And so this plan makes sense, we think economically, so we believe it will happen. We have given the jurisdictions the option of pursuing these other ideas like converting vacant buildings, lowering heights, doing other things, if they can show that they'll work. And they will probably have to bring their money or their land into it to make those things work. And they can do that, but TRPA can't. So that is why we're structuring it this way. We're creating something that works and giving people the option to do something that works better for them. So we are listening to you. We also have a lot of other voices. My position on this board, as is the case with a few other members, is I represent the interests of the state of California, people outside the basin. And so it's a little bit different look at it. And the state of California, as Shelley pointed out, has not been shy about bludgeoning locations that don't take care of this, take care of affordable housing. And their codes and their bludgeoning is way worse than what we're considering. I mean, their regulations, and I live in San Francisco, and we are about to lose all local control over planning. And it's going to be a free-for-all, and it's going to be an unbelievable amount of change. But the city has dug its own hole, and so the state has said, you've had your chance. And I think we have to solve this problem, and I think we've taken a good first step. And I'm glad that hopefully we can approve these in December and then move on to phase 3, the next step, because this is a small slice of the pie that we have to address. And don't worry, I don't mean buildings are going to get bigger. This is just one level of affordability that we're addressing. We have to address truly affordable subsidized housing as well, and other areas. So I thank you guys for all your work and your patience. There was a lot of stuff going on, and you did an incredible amount of work, and I thank the public for all their input. I think it will make this better than it would have been, because we did just go with the bare minimum that we think would work, knowing preemptively knowing that this would be a little tough. So it could have been worse, but your input has made it what it is, and I think this is exciting for the basin. So sorry, Julie. I will.
Mr. Chair, thank you for those great comments. I just was going to try to wrap us up as you go into your deliberations, but really thoughtful discussion. I want to thank this committee and other members of the board that have spent really hours and hours and weeks and years working on this, and the team has been amazing. I'm so proud of our staff that have delivered this terrific package for you. I want to ensure that the public knows that we also care deeply about this community, about the lake. We have listened, and we're doing our best to incorporate those suggestions when we can. And as in most cases that come to you, people have different views. People won't agree. And that's the hard decision that you have ahead of you with your recommendation and then with the vote in December. But just a couple things a couple observations. I really appreciate, Vice Chair, this is your comments about the work of the staff, and that we are embedded in this community. And we do talk about this in the grocery store and, miss our appointments because we're talking so long in the veggie aisle, but people care deeply, and our community is changing and will continue to change. And the thing that I've noticed of being here, not quite as long as Cindy, but in my 30 years, when we just watch the change happen and do not act, we never love the outcome. Like, we are actually, I'm so proud of this organization to try to address things that market forces are bigger than us, and we have an avenue that we can help nudge the market to achieve the policy objectives to make housing more affordable in Tahoe, because we also have learned over the years that housing affects the lake. The lake, the community, and the economy are intertwined. We used to think of these things in silos. They are embedded because we have a total maximum daily load with water quality restoration for lake clarity, that really ties land use decisions into that. Reducing pollutant loads is all connected into this work. People commuting into the basin affect our VMT, then when they can't afford to live here, and air and water quality issues are resulting. And then I'm really surprised that we haven't heard a lot of comment today about our unhoused population in the basin. When I moved here, there was not a homeless, people didn't even talk about homelessness in Lake Tahoe. We have people living in the meadows, freezing. We have people starting fires and degrading natural resources that have been restored by public entities with wetlands restoration, and living in terrible conditions, not only outside unhoused, but in substandard housing right in our community. And it's just not acceptable. And the status quo will get worse. Like, we're already seeing it happen because the market is a powerful force. So I'm very proud of the work that everyone's doing to take action and to move this forward to the full board. You know, just today, some of us were not able to participate with a great celebration of the Tahoe Coalition for the Homeless in South Lake Tahoe, of the opening of new units for permanent housing for unsheltered people, the Bears Den property down at the Y. And this board took a big leap about 2 years ago to help facilitate grants from the state of California. I know the North Shore and Placer County participated in the Operation Turnkey or Home Key, and we have housed on the South Shore at least more than 50 folks in permanent, functional, clean, safe housing, and taken the veteran population to a reduced to a functional zero. So people that were living unsheltered who were veterans now have permanent housing. Because studies, there are a lot of reasons for homelessness, but I was very struck on my last trip to Washington. Any city in America today, seeing people living in tents is unacceptable. And there are a lot of reasons for that we won't get into, but housing is a factor. The research is very clear. With the cost of housing, it is a factor of more people living on the streets. So all of these things connect up to our mission to protect the lake, because we can't lose our communities. And you can see we're all very passionate about this. And I think it's a good bookend to the introduction that John Hester made. You know, we get very technical in these decisions, and we are really working hard to do the due diligence with all of the requirements and the heightened density and coverage and water quality and standards. But there's a human dimension to this that's so important. So I really appreciate everyone's thoughtfulness around your deliberation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Then can I get a motion from any committee member?
Mr. Chair, if I can make sure that we know what we're doing between now and then. I've got 12 different items. 6 are from Shelley. I won't read them all unless you want me to. And 6 from you, Vince.
Okay.
And,
if they are part of the recommendation, we need to have them
Stay with it. Okay.
Yeah, and they're not part of the staff.
Okay.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, like, we can just incorporate this. You don't have to go through each language change that Shelley made.
Okay. I won't go through each language change Shelley made. Vince, clarify the funding strategy for enforcement in the staff report. Clarify the public agency responsibility for BMPs. Add evacuation and safety in the checklist, and the staff report talk about the rules we talked about, Julie talked about with the MAC and so forth. Include the league language on parking, and even though it's in there, can point out that we allow unbundling. Add staff review for unit size, scale, and architecture. And I believe you wanted to substitute Leah Kaufman's definition, or at least some aspects of it.
Yeah, I think we can look at that and see if that's, you know, the perfect language, but I think it definitely closes a lot of those loopholes. So if, you know, if there's something that's objectionable, that can come back to us, but I think it's a good start. You know, I did have it, and then I lost my email. They have it, and it's in everyone's
and I would
packet.
invite John and the other.
Do you want to read it?
Other colleagues to add anything I missed.
Yes, I just need to find it.
Well, there are
Okay.
So
shall I
many
read it?
pages. I'm sorry.
Their requirement is the occupancy of for sale or rental units when authorized is restricted to persons who at all times during ownership or occupancy of the unit reside and are employed within the county year-round, an average of at least 30 hours per week on an annual basis. Employed within the county shall mean that the person earns his or her living from a business or organization operating in and serving the county, which requires his or her physical presence within the boundaries of Summit County in order to complete the task or furnish the service by working in the county at such business or organization an average of at least 30 hours per week on an annual basis.
And obviously, we changed it to Tahoe Truckee Region. That's John Hester and Karen Fink were on the record.
That would create a much bigger VMT problem if with Summit County. Yeah. James?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim Sunrise for the record. If we're going to utilize that definition more so than changing the name, I think it would be prudent to stick in a clause because on occasion, sometimes people become unemployed. So I don't know how to remedy that within that definition.
Karen Fink, we do actually have some language already in the deed restriction that deals with that.
Jessica?
I'm sorry, I was listening, but you did read it a little quickly. So does that allow for that they just have to meet the qualification for the entirety of the time that they're occupying the property? So seasonal workers, even if they're not year round, the entirety of the time that they are here and occupying a rental unit, presumably seasonal workers are only occupying rental units, they would qualify if they meet the other requirements?
I mean, let's look at, that's a good point. Let's
Okay.
look at it and make sure that it does capture that. We
Yeah.
can take that into account.
Can we just ask us versus us wordsmithing, you've been working with our local jurisdictions and I'd really like them to weigh in on the enforceability and make sure, because I like the language other than Summit County. I like Summit County, but I don't. But I do want to be very thoughtful about how we're going to, because we were very intentional. If it was a for sale product that we could help you buy it and you could retire someday and stay there. And so we were intentional on how many years that was. And so if we're going to start making changes that say, I'm not talking about rentals, I'm talking about for sale products.
I would keep that. I think
Yeah.
that part of the language, I was just considering to replace just the work in the basin 30 hours, something that's a little more vague and tightening up that specific part, but leaving in the unemployment protections and the retirement, because I think
For sale, for the for sale
for sale,
product, right?
yeah.
And so just work with the committee. I think you hear our intent. We agree with
Yeah.
tightening it up.
Yeah.
I think we're agreeing with that. And so when you bring it back to the board, tighten that up.
that good marching orders.
And I would ask my colleagues if I missed something that they have in their notes.
John probably has this written down, but we were going to clarify the opt-out provision.
Yeah, I don't necessarily, what I would like to do is clarify the direction of the committee. Because I think right now we can either sharpen some language or add some language, but what you want to direct here is.
I just wanted to clarify the misconception that, my misconception was, the ordinance, once the board is assuming the board approves it, goes into effect in 60 days. But I wasn't taking into account the fact that if the county decides to opt out and come up with some acceptable alternatives, they have 1 year in which to amend their area plan. I think we just need more specificity, John.
Right, so that's the point I want to make certain that is understood by all when voting on this, that the clarification you want is that local jurisdictions get a year to conform their area plan, and the standard that might be at issue will not go into effect for a year until that point.
Right, which allows them time to come up with some reasonable alternatives that achieve the same objective.
But if there's not a conflict, then it goes into effect within 60 days.
Right.
Okay, so we're really talking about height, density, and perhaps parking, but we need.
Everything but coverage. Right.
Okay.
Great, Jessica?
John, just to clarify, two motions separately, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And before you jump there, can I just,
Yeah.
I had one thing that, Vince, you were talking about, I mean, I think we can come up with some language about pre-application review for staff for projects.
Yeah.
I think we can do that.
Okay.
We might just, the language might be to require a pre-application review.
Sure. Does that
We
work
need to.
with staff? Well,
Yeah, we actually had thought about those three. I think that I mentioned the staff review for unit size, scale, and architecture. We'll just put that in as a requirement, but no fee, and it's just administrative.
So, and just on that last point about building compatibility with scale and style, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's usually when it's a not non-conforming, when it's a special use. So those are our special use findings as opposed to when it's a allowable use. The kind of neighborhood compatibility set of findings. What I want to make clear is whether you're asking us to, if it's not a set of special use findings, that is your direction that you want to apply that. Because I think that is a little, from my understanding, that may be a little bigger bite than what you were suggesting.
What would you guys recommend? I guess I want to make sure that it's a little pre-checklist, but it's not a huge burden to staff.
I think what we should do is have, as part of the process for reserving bonus units, staff reviews for those three things.
Okay, great.
Maybe that's it. And I know those are subjective, but I think we just don't want somebody to come in and build a big box.
Yeah.
Maybe the direction to us is that we try to take this concern and figure out a way to either codify it or come back with you with some direction.
Sure.
Or some options.
Yeah.
Okay?
Shelley.
Shelley Aldine for the record. I thought building designs were subject to review by local jurisdictions. So what are we doing differently?
Not, well, we're not requiring anything additional on the local side.
Mm-hmm.
So each local government is going to have to issue its own local permit and whatever requirements they have. So this would be in addition to that, the TRPA would look at these issues that usually come up when it's sorry to get hyper technical with the planning language, but usually when it's a special use finding as opposed to when it's just an allowed use. Most of these will be allowed uses. And I'm kind of looking down the end because is that the distribution or the assignment of bonus units that I'm trying to think of? Anyway, I don't want to.
But our area plans have design review criteria and design themes that are already adopted by the local jurisdictions that are somewhat different from each other. And so my understanding is that would be
duplication.
So why don't we
make
look
sure
at those, and the direction would be that we come back with you with either something that explains how building scale and style compatibility will be taken into account. And if there is not, then how we might propose that it is.
Yeah, I guess just knowing whose regulations have priority, in terms of height and scale. If it's allowed by TRPA by right, you can't do anything about it. Once it gets to the local jurisdiction,
that's where we have to modify our area plan if we're going to change our design standards for those buildings from what we have.
Okay.
That was my understanding of our earlier
I think
discussion on height.
This was maybe for places that weren't getting around to that, or I think just as another check, just to make sure, because we want to make sure that we're protecting our communities as well as getting the housing.
John Hester for the record. I recall the genesis of this was people were worried that they would say it's an achievable unit, but when you looked at the plan, it would be clearly it's an SDR or a luxury condo. And we were just trying to figure out a way when we reserve the bonus units that it isn't what we don't want it to be, it is what we want. So maybe we can work on it. Maybe we defer to the local government design standards or something like
Well,
that.
I think there is a role for us because we're the ones giving out those bonus units. It's our, you know, it's our pot to share. So I think we need to make sure that we are getting what we want in some ways. So at least the size of units. I would think, you know, we've talked about the transition zones and ramping up things in the multifamily area. So looking at scale would be good. I'm all right dropping the architecture part since it'll go through a local review. I mean, this is something, you know, we've been talking about these things and back and forthing all this stuff for so long. You know, now I'm confused and confusing myself
I
on
think we
here.
get the
So,
intent and we'll work on something.
okay, perfect. So are we good on, do we kind of cumulatively understand the motion that someone is theoretically about to make?
Yes, I just want to, the only last thing I want to, it's just a clarification. And John, I know you didn't mean this, but when John talked about adding to the checklist, fire and evacuation, it's already there. And what we're doing is just maybe adding some additional language addressing some of these concerns that have been talked about.
John Hester, for the record, yeah, what he said.
And I'm sorry, I must have missed it, John, when you said it, but the incentives would only apply to areas with permanent funding sources for the enforcement of BMPs. Did you mention that? Wasn't that the league's concern?
I think I mentioned that we would address in the staff report the funding strategy. Clarify what we're trying to do.
Specifically for BMPs, right?
Or are we on B? I'm sorry.
Or area wide, yeah, it's for BMPs.
Yes, yeah.
Or area wide stormwater. treatment
Public
systems.
agencies required for BMPs.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Whew. All right.
Well, you're about to tell
You
me.
need to say it exactly as.
Just for the record, I will make a motion to recommend approval of the required findings found in attachment A, including a finding of no significant effect for the adoption of amendments to the Code of Ordinances, chapters 1, 13, 36, 37, 31, 30. Now, why are those in numerical order? 34, 30, or 52, and 90, and changes to the goals and policies, land use, and housing sections that would only apply to projects applying for deed restricted bonus units, including the changes and recommendations we've discussed herein.
Great. Maria, do you want to do a roll call?
Ms. Spalding,
Yes.
Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Ms. Dis,
Yes.
Ms. Hill, Ms. Loomer,
I'm going to stay off of this one.
Mr. Settlemeyer,
Yes.
and Mr. Chair, that motion passes.
Great, thank you. Do you want to make the second one? All right. Yeah, seriously, sort as you go.
Can't do it on the fly. This is Jessica, just for the record. I'll make a motion to recommend approval and adoption of ordinance 2023 found in attachment C, amending ordinance 87-9 as amended for the adoption of amendments to the TRPA Code of Ordinances, chapters 1, 13, 36, 37, 31, 30, 34, 52, and 90, and changes to the goals and policies, land use, and housing sections that would only apply to projects applying for deed restricted bonus units to the TRPA governing board, including the changes and recommendations we've discussed here today.
Great, thank you. Maria, do you want to do a roll call?
Yes.
Mr. Settlemeyer,
Yes.
Ms. Loomer,
I'm staying off this as well.
Ms. Hill, Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Ms. Alding,
Yes.
Ms. Dis,
Yes.
Mr. Honigman,
Yes.
Mr. Chair, that motion passes.
Great, thank you. All right. So we're on to the next agenda item number 4, upcoming topics. As a reminder to the public, since this item is information only, members of the public are welcome to comment at the final public comment item. So John?
I will make this very brief, Mr. Chairman. John Hester for the record. Next month, you have the Tahoe Basin Area Plan amendments from Placer County. Well, this will be at the full governing board, so that's why Julie said, make sure you enjoy that holiday lunch. In 2024, this is not all inclusive and maybe not in the order it'll happen, but we have mixed use, some climate smart amendments. South Lake Tahoe has a set of amendments. Douglas County, we are anticipating some amendments. And Washoe County, you heard from Member Hill that there will be some there. And I suspect there may be some coming from Placer County too, but I'm not sure. Maybe not. I don't know. Okay, we've been talking with staff about packaging something up, but don't know exactly what it'll be. So you got a lot coming.
Great. Thank you, John. All right, any comments or questions on that from any committee member? Nope. All right. Then we can move on with the agenda as this was informational only. All right, next item is item number 5, committee member comments. Are there any committee members who have any comments? All right.
I was just going to say, I really appreciate my colleagues and the coaching. This is Cindy Gustafson for the record. And just how deliberate we are in what we're doing and the thoughtfulness behind it. And I thank you, especially those of you who are not living it every day and just hear the brunt of it, how much thought and energy you put into it. So just wanted to thank you for that.
Great, thank you. Any other comments? All right, then we move to our final matter of business, which is general public interest comments. Any member of the public wishing to address the Regional Plan Implementation Committee on any item listed or not listed on the agenda may do so at this time. Individuals or groups who have already commented on items listed on the agenda are not permitted to comment on that same topic. The Regional Plan Implementation Committee is prohibited by law from taking immediate action on or discussing issues raised by the public during this public comment period. All right, so if any member of the public wishes to speak at this time, please raise your hand now in person by clicking the raise hand at the bottom of your Zoom screen or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you'll be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. There is no one present. Is there anyone online? We have one, it looks like, one hand raised.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We have one hand raised so far. Niobe Austere, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Sorry, guys, I just figured out where the mute button was. This is Niobe Bernastier. The only question I have, and it was again about the process and why it's still once again being pushed forward so quickly. I see that we made some great strides today, some recommendations, 12 recommendations to the language, but I don't understand how this can be voted on by the REPIC as is without seeing that actual language that will be supposedly changed to the way that everyone would agree without seeing it. So I just wanted to make that public comment, and especially, again, disappointed that this is going so fast. Obviously, it's just one more committee. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Niobe. It looks like we have one more comment from Doug.
Doug Flaherty, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Thanks, Chair, members of the committee. First of all, want to just say shout out to John Settlemeyer for trying to reinforce that when you guys are up there chatting with each other, it sounds like a internal club. I know your voices, I know who you are, but the public does not. So while it might seem redundant to have to state your name every single time, that's probably not necessary, but I think that there can be some improvement in that arena. Also like to give a shout out to Vince for having the wherewithal to start to at least discuss evacuation. Whether you guys like it or not, whether the staff likes it or not, you're going to end up having to do a roadway by roadway evaluation. And it's clear that the word evacuation is avoided at all costs, and staff tamps down any possibility that that should happen. It's dangerous to the community. You're over capacity in the Tahoe Basin. Your roads are over capacity. Your traffic counts are in error. They're dated. But you're going to probably have to do this sooner or later. I wish you'd provide the leadership to get it done and protect the residents and the visitors of this basin. It's unbelievable how you guys try to avoid this. It's just amazing. It's dangerous. It's unsafe. And I wish you guys would bite the bullet and just do the roadway evacuation and follow all of the Attorney General's guidelines, not just cherry picking one issue. Also, the fire departments are not required to do in any of their codes a evacuation plan or approve an evacuation on a building or project other than evacuation from the building itself. So that we are void of that requirement. And it's a misunderstanding to believe that the fire agencies are going to create evacuation plans for, the neighborhoods or whatever. Anyway, whatever evacuation plan you have, like the East Side evacuation plan is totally deficient. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug. Looks like Pamela raised her hand as well.
Yes, thank you. This is Pamela Sigdinas for the record. Since there's been an exceptional amount of TRPA staff and board member sharing of compliments and acknowledging each other's work, I think it's really significant to acknowledge the work on behalf of the public who are not paid, who are volunteering their time, who are forced to go to multiple layers of meetings to try to figure out all the various committees, all the various processes, all the various individuals. If there were not more people on the call today, the reason is most people have literally run out of steam. They don't have the time, they don't have the energy, they're certainly not being paid to spend time on this issue. I also wanted to acknowledge that there was an individual raised from the APC meeting. I would like to, a woman who was not on today's call, I would like to talk about Aaron Vanderpool. He's a young man who lives here in Incline Village. He works very hard. He would very much like to see STRs universally taken out of residential units and put in commercial multifamily areas within the basin. And on behalf of Aaron, I would really like to tell you, this was a missed opportunity. If you're addressing housing, you really need to reopen the STR discussion basin-wide. And I would encourage you, please, Vince, you have led on a number of issues here. Please address this STR issue basin-wide. I think a lot of the community would rally to your side because that would allow for families who want yards and other opportunities to enjoy living in the basin to have more opportunities available. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pamela. Looks like we don't have any other hands raised, so we'll close public comment. Oh, we just got one. Ellie, you slipped in right under the wire.
Thank you. there is a lot to be said. All the comments today have been reiterated numerous times. I want to thank Pamela. I want to thank Doug. I want to thank everybody that commented today. But I do think Pamela brought forward a very important message that the public is out here. We are not the silent minority. And we do our best to bring factual comments. We're not confused. We just don't understand how some of the information is presented. And most recently, I have been getting comments and questions answered. I would hope that in the future, I know staff is busy trying to craft these code amendments, but also the public needs to have their questions answered. So we're not asking questions that don't make sense. On another note, away from this, the TBAP is coming forward, the Tahoe Basin Area Plan. We all need to watch our acronyms. And I sincerely hope that you do take in consideration the people that are going to be most affected and have that last governing board approval meeting on the North Shore to allow more of those people who are affected the most to participate in their hometowns. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. It looks like we have Sue, who also raised her hand.
Yes, thank you. I'm not sure if it's coming through yet. Can you hear me? Okay. Yep. I wanted to speak up too. I wanted to thank everyone who has worked so hard on this, along with the public, as being on the original plan teams back in the early 2000s for the Eastern Placer County planning team. I wanted to talk a little bit more about short-term rentals since that was just brought up too, because it is a threshold that we're not taking into account. We all know there are more people here intrinsically, and yet the counts are based on past population and census. So with consideration to that and what you've heard so much from already from people, I was at a meeting yesterday for our water district, and water and sewage flows are increased. We can tell that there's a lot more people up here. And if that is ever counted towards a threshold to help with population control, help with evacuation control, with traffic and such, because I think we're all assuming that we can fit more people in here, but we want to do it. We want to help workforce. It's not, maybe we just don't have the room for it. And I just, I still feel that ache in my stomach with the decisions that are being made right now, so quickly put through without considering changes in thresholds and such. So thank you very much for your work. Please consider what you know in your gut. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. All right, it looks like we don't have any other hands raised. So I will close public comments and ask for a motion to adjourn. All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, the meeting is adjourned at, what is that, 3:45? All right, thank you all.